Good morning. My name is Sarah Rubin. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second day of our online environmental engagement conference. Our tagline is Building Our Skills Together. And we're so pleased that you have chosen to join us this morning. Again, my name is Sarah Rubin. I work at the Department of Conservation. I am a mediator and meeting facilitator, and I am going to be your host or moderator for today's conference. We are going to start by just touching on the Spanish interpretation that we are providing throughout all 3 days of this conference. If you are not familiar with the interpretation options on Zoom, now is a great moment for you to familiarize yourself with those options. And I am going to have my colleague Marta explain the way that the Spanish interpretation works in Spanish. So if you speak English, you don't need to do anything right now. We're just going to have Marta explain it in Spanish to help folks find that channel if they haven't already. Marta, off to you.
Thank you. Buenos días. Tendremos servicio de interpretación en español, así que si busca hacia abajo en su pantalla puede buscar y ahí dice interpretación y cámbiale a español. Y también tendremos, si necesita mandar un correo electrónico, mándelo ahí al correo electrónico que dice engagewithus2020@gmail.com. Y también no olvide de poner su micrófono en silenciado. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. So I'm going to encourage everybody participating a number of times today to actually, even if you don't speak Spanish, to try out that feature so you become more familiar with it. All part of our learning together effort. So, I am now going to briefly talk about the ways you can participate in today's conference. I'll get into these a little more at the beginning of our 9:30 panel. You have the chat option, Q&A, which we're asking you to use when you have questions versus just a comment or thought you want to share. Then some of the sessions have polls. We're going to be doing a poll in just a moment. And then we have an email that we set up just for this conference, engagewithus2020@gmail.com. If you are having any challenges getting on and you'd rather connect with us through the Gmail, if you are watching through the Cal EPA webcast, we still would like you to participate, and you can send in a question, thought, or comment through the Gmail. We have a group of 17 volunteers who in different parts of the conference are helping to monitor all the chat and Q&A in both English and Spanish and this Gmail account. So we encourage you to engage with us. We would like everybody to have our conference packet handy. If you don't have the conference packet available or with you now, we encourage you to take a moment to do that. The link for the packet is in the chat box. We put it in there so you can easily get it, and or you might have it as an attachment in your email. So while you're listening to this opening, grab the packet so you can see all the details about all our great sessions, our 60 fantastic speakers, and their bios. Oop, look at that. Okay. All right. So I'm about to go over our agenda, but before I do that, we want to go ahead and do a poll. We want to get a little bit of a sense of who's here, and I'm going to launch our poll. So we're curious how many folks participated yesterday, if you made it to any of our sessions. And I'm going to give just a moment for folks to fill that out. And then while folks are taking their time, we've got about 50% of you who've participated. So for those of you who've already clicked the poll, we're going to ask you to now open up your chat feature And please share with us one thing you are hoping to get out of today's conference, or one thing you're hoping to get out of the sessions that you're planning to go to. All right, I'm going to give a little more time for the poll, and I'm excited to see what comes into the chat. And then one other thing I'm going to mention that I'll probably mention a couple times today is that because we have our live Spanish interpretation happening, we have asked all of our speakers to be mindful to not speak too fast. Okay, so a pretty good percentage of you have voted, and I'm going to close our poll. And I am going to share the results. And let's see, it looks like 34% of you went to 1 to 2 sessions yesterday. 40% of you went to 3 or 4, 12% went to everything, very impressive. And then 14% of you couldn't make it, which we understand, but we are glad you're here now. So as you continue to share with us, especially if you've just joined us, welcome. We would like you to, in the chat box, share something you're hoping to get out of today. I'm going to review our agenda, and then I'm very excited to welcome our Lieutenant Governor. So today, in just a minute, we're going to have Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis giving us our welcome. Then at 9:30, we have a fantastic panel who are going to talk about best practices for online engagement. Then at 10:30, we have another fantastic set of speakers who are going to talk about bridging divides, making a difference in local communities. And then our 11:30 session is around how to optimize engagement on digital channels. Okay, so now I'm very pleased, it's my honor to welcome our Lieutenant Governor. I'm just going to read a little bit from your bio before I turn it over to you. So, all right, so Ambassador Eleni Kounalakis was sworn in as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of California by Governor Gavin Newsom on January 7th, 2019. She is the first woman elected Lieutenant Governor of California. From 2010 to 2013, Kounalakis served as President Barack Obama's ambassador to the Republic of Hungary. Kounalakis was the first Greek-American woman at the age of 43, one of America's youngest, to serve as U.S. ambassador. Shortly after being sworn in, Governor Newsom appointed Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis as the governor's representative for international affairs and trade development. She is passionate about early childhood development, and Kounalakis served as a member of California's first 5 commission and the California Blue Ribbon Commission on Autism. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It is wonderful to be here with all of you, and I just want to officially welcome everyone to day 2 of the Online Environmental Engagement Conference, and recognize and thank the California Environmental Protection Agency and the California Natural Resources Agency for putting together this incredibly important conference. So welcome everybody to the brave new world of community engagement. Here we are online, several hundred people talking about how democracy works when people cannot get together in a public forum in person. This is incredibly important. And let me just start by saying that a great deal of the technology that we are using here right now in California to move public meetings, hundreds of them from across the state, from local government to state government. A lot of this technology was developed right here in California. We are on the cutting edge of so many things. We were the first state in the union to issue a stay-at-home order. And now here we are leading with all of your participation, leading and making sure that our online public forums are as engaging to the public as they can possibly be. This is incredibly important. And I know yesterday you started out with training on how to use Zoom and maximize the Zoom forum, the other various platforms, GoToMeeting and other platforms that you're being trained on. And today you're going to be looking at how to dive even deeper into making the experience for the public feel as authentic as possible. You know, it was just a few months ago when I had the opportunity to address many of you in talking about how to manage the in-person environment in public meetings. And a big part of that is the what I call the atmospherics. In a room, when people come together, you can feel the tension, you can feel the excitement, you can feel frustration. All of that tends to happen when human beings occupy the same place. And some of that can be a challenge to deal with. And frankly, when you're on a computer screen, maybe some of that tension goes away. But the fact of the matter is that the whole purpose of having community engagement in our public forums, in our democracy, is for people to feel that they do matter and they are impactful. So finding ways to do that's going to be very, very important for all of you. I've, as you can imagine, had the opportunity to participate now in countless Zoom meetings over these last few months, including, for instance, the University of California meetings, the State Lands Commission meetings, the California State University meetings, and we have public comment. It is different. We hear voices, we don't see faces. How does that impact the decision making? Do we take those voices as seriously as we would if they were attached to people standing not too distant from us in listening to their concerns? So there are many things to consider, and most importantly is that all of you have the tools in order to enhance the experience, both for the bodies who are taking in information and for the people who are perhaps overcoming their own challenges in being able to use technology in order to engage and make sure that their voice is heard. Let me just say one other thing about this is that we are looking at some very serious economic outfall at the state of California to the COVID-19 crisis. The governor is predicting and working to fill a $54 billion gap between the budget that he announced in January and now the May revised process. This is serious, and there are going to be stakeholders across this state who are very concerned and very frustrated with what might come in terms of programs that they rely on or that they believe from a very emotional level when you're talking about environmental protection are incredibly important. So being sensitive, again, through the lens of a camera, being sensitive to the concerns that are coming at you during what will most certainly be significant economic challenges over at least the next year are very, very important. But again, California is at the cutting edge, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks. I know we can do it, and I know we can do it because of all of you, the people who signed up, who are participating in this program, whether you work for the government, whether you work within an NGO, your commitment to ensuring that the public square continues to be vibrant, even though we cannot meet in person, to ensure that the voice of the public is heard by decision makers. All of you out there who are facilitating during this challenging time, I believe in the capacity of you to make sure that the experience is as close to the real thing as possible.
Thank you. So we have time for some Q&A. So I am going to encourage the more than 300 of you who are on this Zoom platform to go ahead and ask a question of our Lieutenant Governor while we have her. That was fantastic. Thank you. So let's see. Do we have any questions we want to share, team? Itza and gang.
This is Elizabeth. We have a few folks who said that they're looking forward to learning more about best practices for engagement today, and also looking forward to learning more about how to engage with those who lack access to internet or other digital devices.
Well, thank you for raising that. It's incredibly important. One thing that I think is at the top of everyone's agenda in state government is bridging the digital divide. It's very well known at this point that when the stay-at-home order was issued in March, that students across the state had to pivot, parents had to pivot into helping students with their online learning. 3 million students in public higher education, 72,000 courses in the CSU system went from in-person to online. And through education, we've seen more than anything how the digital divide is affecting Californians, not just in terms of having a smartphone with the capacity to join a Zoom call, not just in terms of having a laptop or an iPad, but also having the internet connectivity. So there's been a lot of work that's been done out there to help support bridging the digital divide, but we all know it is still extremely difficult. And so in your messaging for participation, being able to let the public know of any resources, any libraries that where people can go to access internet service, any Starbucks that are offering internet service for free, any hotspot passes that are being distributed. Any information. Now, it's not going to cover everybody because, frankly, the digital divide is a crevasse that we are working very, very hard to bridge. But in the meantime, ensuring that whatever resources are out there are accessible to people who want to participate in public hearings is very, very important.
Thank you. It looks like we've had a few more questions. We might have time for one or two more. Elizabeth, do you want to read our next question?
Sure, this one has been elevated by a few folks. Lieutenant Governor, what are your thoughts about utilizing social distancing outdoor education experiences instead of digital ones? What is the likelihood of seeing outdoor classrooms on campuses moving forward?
Well, I think this is definitely being considered by academic institutions, whether or not you can put up tents over playgrounds and spread students out and keep them a good social distance from the educators. It's something that's being looked at as a tool, but and California, frankly, we've got great weather to facilitate that kind of thing, but what do you do on a terribly hot day? What do you do if it's raining? These are issues that create their own logistical challenges. So while I think that this is something that on a case-by-case basis we will probably see, I think that it's difficult because it doesn't have a level of predictability that we need in order to sustain that kind of thing. But I will tell you, there's no better time than now to get outside. And so the degree to which people can do their Zoom calls from outside, under a tree or an umbrella, that kind of thing I think is really important to encourage, because what we know about the virus is that if people are in, even if they're 6 feet apart, if there is a sustained amount of time that you're in a closed environment with someone without proper ventilation, you can catch it. Whereas if you're outside where there's all kinds of natural ventilation, it's safer.
Marta and Noemi, I'm wondering if there any questions have come in Spanish that you would like to elevate.
Not at this
There's a
time.
question on, from what I understand, depending on the cities, the schools are providing the laptops to the students.
Yes, that's right. So I will tell you, Tony Thurman has been very active in raising philanthropic dollars to close the gap. He's raised quite a bit of money. First partner, Jennifer Newsom, this has been one of her top initiatives to raise funds to get laptops and iPads to students. But again, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of students in California who don't have access to adequate equipment. I was on a call early on with a handful of teachers in rural parts of the state, and they told me about families where the kids have one iPhone or one smartphone. And for their courses, they were passing it around depending on which student had which class at which time. This is not acceptable. This is not enough. So yes, cities are creating their own initiatives, local governments, local philanthropic groups. At the state level, we're doing what we can, but we're going to need more. And again, it's not just the technology itself, it's the connectivity issue, which has been a problem for a long time in the state of California. I went to 58 counties when I was running for my office, and what I heard in rural counties is we're getting left behind because we don't have high-speed internet access. So this is top of the agenda. There are many initiatives going on. It will not be a magic wand, but the pressure that is being put on everyone to close this digital divide has been spurred by the COVID crisis. And so that in some ways is the silver lining. But again, we have a lot of work to do to close this gap.
Okay, I think we might get in one or two more questions because a whole bunch have come in. Elizabeth, what do you have for us?
Let's see. The top voted question right now is, Lieutenant Governor, what do you think is a key message we can convey to the public about government adaptations in the age of COVID and social unrest?
Thank you for that question. I really think that the key message is to express confidence that we can get through this, that we will get through this, and that that doesn't mean painting over the challenges that we have. Transparency, honesty, ensuring that government is responsive to what's coming at us is critically important. That is why you are doing this training, because people need to be heard. They need to be heard right now, and they're grieving and anger over the horrible, horrible death of George Floyd. And they need to be heard when we talk about the inequities that are facing us in our state. Now, frankly, I think that that is one thing that California does well. We are engaged with our citizenry. That doesn't mean that we can deliver everything that's necessary all at once, but that the ability to look into the faces of the people in our state and say, we get it, we understand the trauma, we understand the demands for equity, we understand the demands for responsiveness and transparency, and if we work together, roll up our sleeves, be honest about the challenges ahead of us, and mobilize the incredible resources that we have in this state as the 5th largest economy in the world, we will get through it together.
All right, one more before we run out of time. Elizabeth.
The next upvoted question is, how do we know which communities have received bolstered digital support? We want to be inclusive and not assume that people don't have capability.
So, I think the county websites have done, again, they're all different, but they've done a pretty good job at informing the public about what kind of services they're providing in terms of everything from how to reopen if you fall within a category that's able to reopen, to other resources that are being offered either at the local level, the state level, or the federal level. So I think that that's where I would start. And then of course we have an incredible website, and I just encourage everyone, if you haven't been to it yet, go to it, because it will help when you're out there and people are asking you questions. It will help for you to know what's on the state website. It's covid19.ca.gov. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to interact with. And I have found it to be, even for myself, and we do on our social media platforms, we have been doing frequently asked questions, because we're getting lots and lots of questions. We filter through them and we direct people to the right resources. Frankly, our state website has really risen to the level of being able to be informative, again, translated into multiple languages, and is pretty interactive, not just for what people can access in terms of state aid, but how to access federal aid and how to get more information from your local governments as well.
Great. So we're almost at the bottom of the hour. Is there any last thing you want to say before we have to say goodbye?
Just thank you, everybody. I know some people are tech jockeys and this is all really easy. I have to tell you, I've had my Zoom crash. I've had my face look like it's in a shadow. I've had people walk behind me, including my kids, eating peanut butter sandwiches. It's challenging, but this resource today will really help. And I know that for those who have a steeper learning curve, that the technology is pretty user-friendly. And with practice, you'll be able to do more to ensure that all of our 40 million Californians out there who want to make sure that their voice is heard during this very challenging time will have access to do it. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kounalakis. Take care.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna unpin you in Zoom speak. Okay, thank you so much. So we have a couple of minutes before our 9:30 session. I am going to go ahead and pull up the slides that go with that session. There we are. So in just a couple of minutes, we are gonna start with our first panel from the front lines of California, best practices for online engagement. And I'm gonna ask Julia to go ahead and turn on her camera so I can say hi. Hi, okay. Yeah, let's test your mic.
Hey, Sarah, can you hear me okay?
Perfect. All right. So, wonderful. Okay, Italia, I see you there too. Hi. Good morning. So, I am going to go ahead and just remind everyone about the options they have for engaging with us during this session. So, a lot of folks have joined since we started at 9 a.m. So for those of you who've already heard this, forgive us. But if you are interested in accessing our Spanish interpretation, we highly encourage you to do that. And even if you are monolingual English, we are highly encouraging you to check out this feature. You can go on, just listen for 15 or 20 seconds and then flip back and forth. But we'd like you to experience what it's like to be hearing this other stream. All right, before I turn things over to Julia, I want to highly encourage folks to use the chat function to share thoughts as we go. And then the Q&A function, which is separate from the chat function, if you can please put questions in there, and then you can like the questions, which will elevate them. That way, because we've got hundreds of people online, that way when we get to our Q&A session, our colleagues who are helping us, Elizabeth, Tish, Noemi, and Martha, that will help them to know which questions to elevate for our speakers to ask. Okay, so with that, Julia, I am gonna have you unmute. And so one of the things I meant to mention today, since today's conference is all about doing digital meetings now, I'm going to be a little bit more transparent about what I would call behind the curtain facilitation efforts that I'm making as part of our learning together throughout the day. So one of the things I'm going to do is Julia, is I'm going to do something Zoom calls a spotlight video. And so it means it pins her video so that everyone sees it versus potentially the different rectangle squares we see. So with that, Julia, you are on.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. And right when you handed it over to me, there's a helicopter going overhead. So just bear with me if there's any background noise. That's just the life we live in now. But yeah, thank you so much. My name is Julia Jordan. I'm a policy coordinator with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And I'm typically working out of our Sacramento office, which is on unrecognized Nisenan territory. Our organization works in the San Joaquin and Eastern Coachella Valleys on a whole variety of issues, from clean water to housing to air quality and agriculture. And before I kind of kick off this conversation and this morning and kind of get into some of the recommendations that we developed on, especially on public participation at the local, regional, and state levels around engaging with government decision-making, I just wanted to take a quick 15 seconds to just do a moment of silence for George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and the countless men, women, trans, and non-binary individuals who have been killed at the hands of police. So we'll just take a quick 10, 15 seconds to breathe and reflect. Okay, thank you. So as we get to the session, and I'm going to try to be relatively brief and get through the content, I want us to think about how we sort of think about these words equity and justice, and how community engagement and public participation themselves are really within a system of highly gendered and highly racialized practices that I think we become too comfortable in, and how it is that we can really intentionally both reflect on that and also change it, even in these kinds of contexts that it may sometimes seem are not directly linked to something like police brutality, but that are really underneath the same systems of racism and structural inequity. So, we as Leadership Council have had to shift dramatically as an organization, as have many, in terms of how we reach out to the community members that we work with, and how we show up to Board of Supervisors meetings, how we show up to legislative meetings and hearings, and try to make sure that the residents that we work with are able to actually participate in those meetings. I'm focusing here primarily on those types of state and local government remote participation opportunities that we've sort of seen since shelter in place has began. So a basic principle, and I think I can advance, right? Next slide if you're able to. So a basic principle is really that all residents should be given the opportunity to have their voices heard in local, regional, and state decision-making processes in an inclusive and transparent manner. So that means whether or not it's a pandemic, whether or not there is uprising going on around the country, really to think about how do we do that times and let this be an opportunity to learn how to do that. Just really briefly, I'm going to illustrate something that one of my colleagues has been experiencing and kind of shared with me and the residents that she works with as well on what it's been like to try to do public participation with local government. And this is something that since the beginning of shelter in place, you know, we've been fighting for things like local rental moratoriums to protect those who have lost jobs, who have had increased expenses, and unable to pay rent during the COVID-19 crisis. And you know, my colleague and several others worked really hard to get organized residents and local organizations and partners to submit public comment on that issue to the Board of Supervisors. They were able to get about 17 public comments received before the deadline. Some of them, I believe, also in Spanish. And unfortunately, those comments were not acknowledged in any way at the meeting, let alone read out loud. So it felt as if they had gone off the radar. And that's, you know, that's the kind of thing when you're not able to go in person and actually just speak when there are those limited opportunities, that some of those issues around equitable engagement can fall to the wayside. And how do you make sure that that's not happening, right? And so there's no safe opportunity. People don't feel safe going in person, even if that's an option. You know, there's another resident we work with who runs a food distribution site in Fresno, and who, you know, wanted to submit comments on the need for PPE for food distribution volunteers, because that wasn't part of the proposal, for example, how to use CARES Act dollars going to local governments. She submitted comments and they were also not addressed at all. So we're thinking about the ways that comments are not addressed that are coming directly from community and community members who are, you know, belong to communities of color, low-income communities, and how to really make sure that their voices are heard. So next slide. So we have a lot of recommendations here, starting just with facilitating virtual public participation. So letter around to local and state agencies and jurisdictions on some of these that we think are ways to ensure that people can engage. Other than being to reach out to community organizations, stakeholders who may be in direct communication with residents who are, it might be difficult for the government to reach out to. This is sort of the same in remote or not, but making sure that you also send preparatory materials to, you know, properly translated for the community that the different communities that you want to make sure to be inclusive of, and have community organizations help with doing that, like be able to offer and become more inclusive, make those meetings more inclusive. Notifying the public, so that means not only just times and agendas, but also the details for remote participation. And we're saying here 72 hours in advance, because we've seen these really, you know, everyone's operating very quickly, but it's like if you get something less than 24 hours in advance, it's really, really hard to organize. It's hard to get people there. It's hard to even know something's happening. So making sure that things are in advance and that you're communicating them clearly. Posting agendas, posting things, and translated as much as possible. And then providing multiple two-way communication options. So that's really, if you have a phone, to have the opportunity to call in, even if you aren't able to use your computer. We talk having broadband access, right? So those who may not have internet, you have to, like, having a phone option is really, really critical. We also are constantly asking for translation services. So that's something that we don't expect because it hasn't been a given, but it would be amazing. And like for this event, I know, you know, Spanish interpretation has been just throughout a given. And I think that would be great to see more on the local level as well as in some of the state and legislative spaces as well. There are simultaneous translation tools out there. I think you've all learned about some of them already, but we've been experimenting as well with using Zoom for that. And then consulting community organizations on whether or not, oh, sorry, just the last thing on the first. I think you jumped ahead a couple slides there. All right, yeah, this will.
I'm sorry.
Okay. There we go. Yeah,
I apologize.
on there was. That's okay. That's okay. It was just the last point on, yeah, making sure that it's a conversation about when it may be appropriate or not to delay a meeting based on the fact that a lot of, especially regulatory disadvantaged communities and communities of color. Okay, next slide. And I'll do this last bit here, but so the next slide is public comment. Yes. So these recommendations are more specifically on public comment. So these are just a little bit more detailed on our recommendations about giving plenty of time for comments to be made, making sure they can be accepted from the time they're noticed all the way to the meeting. Again, having the option of not just internet, but also having email or phone, and providing real-time comments. So allowing the opportunity to do live comments throughout the meeting. And then really not limiting the opportunities to just email and not limiting them to an arbitrary word limit. So we've had a situation where, you know, we submitted comments and only, I think, 250 words were read, equated to about a minute, 20 seconds, despite the fact that, you know, in that case, we had been told that we had 3 minutes for comments. So that kind of clarity and making sure it's not just arbitrary really is critical. And then, you know, allowing comments to be read aloud. And then we also have an idea around, you know, allowing phone message comments and being able to play those back. And then again, the point on multiple. So next slide. All right, so less stress is best. This is really just trying, you know, we really want to emphasize, again, there's so much going on right now. People have a lot going on. Respecting the time of residents and community leaders is really, really important. Sometimes engagement with the state, with the local government is not the priority. People, it's also the first time able to do that because of the fact that it's remote. So just being aware of what are the pieces that need to be addressed earlier rather than later. How much time are you taking? Are you requiring people to sit and stand on their phone for 2 hours in order to give a 1-minute comment? You know, things like that. Having simple and clear information about the event, about how people are supposed to get on, how they provide comment, how they speak, how they chat, whatever the features are. And then having clearly stated outcomes for any of these kinds of events and remote opportunities to be clear, what is this engagement opportunity gonna do for me, right? How is engaging in it gonna be worth the time of especially residents of the state who are struggling with making their bills, struggling with access to some of the most basic human resources. Next slide. And this is my last slide. So the future of engagement. This is really just about, you know, this is an opportunity to learn from where we're at and to restructure and refashion some institutions and some of the structures and systems that we know are not functioning for all people, we know are not equitable and just for all people, and start even just within this one kind of space of remote participation, how to in longer term start to think about, you know, building on the potential for remote access we have residents who are actually pretty excited that for the first time, they can call in and make a comment for a Sacramento hearing because they've never been able to drive the 6 hours or something to get up for one day to make, again, a 1 to 3 minute comment, right? So that is an exciting opportunity. It's an opportunity to strengthen translation services and the ability for the government to provide interpretation, local, regional, and state. It's a broad access for all opportunity, which the Lieutenant Governor touched on. It's an opportunity to invest in technology and infrastructure for community education, to train people on online tools. We developed a Zoom 101 in English and Spanish that we've been working with residents on for getting on community meetings that we've been hosting. And then adopting policies to really require effective engagement for increased access to programs and resources, and really having outcomes that improve public health, racial justice in disadvantaged communities. So I urge people to really think about what are those opportunities that are coming up now and how can they be sort of interwoven with the realities of the world that we're in right now, both from the public health side and the racial justice side. So with that, I'll pass it on to Italia. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome Italia Garcia, the Interim Executive Director of the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. So Italia, you're gonna take over the screen, right?
Yes, I will be.
Okay, so I have stopped sharing so that you can take over.
Perfect.
Let's see here.
Is that working good?
Yes, Italia, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Itza, can you help me to unpin Julia and to instead pin Italia? I don't seem to have the little box to do that. There we go. Okay, you're on.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Italia Garcia, and I'm the Interim Executive Director at CCAJ, the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. And I want to thank my co-panelist, Julia, for sort of setting the stage for us to have the conversations about access, especially right now during this critical time, right? I think many of us had already known that technology was sort of going to start to take over in many ways in our workspace and in our lives, but we didn't think it would come so soon, or we were just not preparing for that. And so I'm going to be touching a little bit more on the practical side of what our organization is doing, how it touches on the recommendations provided by Julia from Leadership Council, and also share some anecdotal experiences, both good and not so good, and where there's room for improvement. And so I hope that provides a real life issues and real life opportunities that we are experiencing right now. So 1 second. Sorry. And just a little bit about us as an organization. We're an environmental justice organization based out of Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And we've been around for over 40 years addressing environmental injustices and making sure that our community are uplifted and empowered to voice their concerns and address environmental injustices. And 1 second. Okay, perfect. And so I wanted to start off with talking about how we've been engaging with, and sorry if there's some background noise, I hope it's not too loud. Also, there's an airport nearby, and so we're all in that same struggle. But I wanted to address some experiences that we've been having with government agencies, right? So as I mentioned, we work in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties and in multiple cities, predominantly the city of Riverside, which some of you, if you're familiar with Southern California, right? City of Riverside, city of Jurupa Valley, city of San Bernardino, Fontana, Colton, and other unincorporated parts. And we've been able to really compare the amount of either good intention and really proactive approach that some state agencies and local governments are taking in terms of both engaging with the community during this pandemic, but even beforehand. So just to provide an example, prior to last year, Grupo Valley City, which is a relatively new city, it incorporated into a new city in 2011. And since then, they were not displaying their city council meetings. They were not being recorded or live streamed in any platform. So the only way for anyone to either get information on this was to go in person and or just read the minutes, right? And so it wasn't until last year that the new council really took it upon themselves to make sure that this option was available for residents. And I just think to myself, right, have we not had that, what we had done in this pandemic if we didn't have that structure already set in place? And other cities, you know, that have been perhaps around for longer time and sort of have more support in their technology and departments, you know, they've had online streaming for a long time now. And but we did see a really highlight in changes was in the city of Riverside. They were providing the option for people to call in real time. And I say that to highlight the real time portion because unfortunately, in comparison, in Riverside County, you were able to call into the meeting, but you had to sign up within 2 days before. So it was, the deadline was 24 hours to 72 hours before the actual meeting. You had to register and then you had to call the morning of. And if you didn't register within that timeline, then you were not going to be able to call in anymore. And so those two comparisons are very important because you have communities. The communities that we serve are predominantly communities of color, Latinx, immigrant communities, Spanish-speaking communities, right, that are often already disenfranchised and disengaged from participating. And so you add on another layer of an obstacle to engage, you just completely, dismiss these opportunities for engagement. And so those are some of the real things that we've seen right now during the transition and in the COVID crisis. Now, I wanted to share some of the, in terms of our actual in action, and I call it this sort of like the presentation in action because we're living it right now. We're learning as you all are as we go, right? And some of these things were, like I mentioned, some folks, some organizations, some government agencies, and even nonprofits had a smoother shift, but others not so much. One of the things I do want to highlight that we've seen that is working is the different ways that we can engage in social media. And this is not just, obviously social media can be portrayed sometimes targeted towards younger folks, but I'll be honest, a lot of our community members, they use Facebook to get their news all the time, right? They use WhatsApp as a tool for them to communicate. And this is because they've been using this for a long time prior to this to communicate with, relatives across, the world. And so, tapping into these existing methods of communication was critical for us as an organization, right? We knew that we had a large audience of our older generation folks in Facebook, our younger generation in Instagram and other social media platforms, and then methods of communication, daily through WhatsApp and others, right? So we've taken it upon ourselves to amp our technology and infrastructure, right? We got a full Zoom account, which we didn't have before. We all had to go through Zoom trainings as staff, and now we're also providing those trainings to community members. We had our first community wide organizing Zoom meeting, and this was, from anywhere from our youth organizer and community leaders to our elderly folks, and they were as engaged as they would be in an in-person meeting. And for us, that was very, very positive and uplifting to be able to still feel that connection and also reach them where they are at. And so a lot of our messaging is targeted differently if we're posting something on social media on Facebook versus Instagram. it might have a different message or a different target audience. So I think we always have to be cognizant of that in terms of, you know, the online engagement. It's not one size fits all. And so I also want to highlight, we had the opportunity to do a Zoom webinar with Congressman Takano. You know, as an organization, we've been doing a lot of work around the census, and we had to shift a lot of our census field work into digital work. And so having, you know, governments reach out to us as an organization, reach out to community members to highlight their stories and to highlight their work also empowers them, and it makes them seem that, you know, just because we can't meet in person or we need to have the social distancing doesn't mean that their stories go untold, and that for us is very important. You know, we were able to share in bilingual news outlets and various ethnic media outlets. You know, radio, given that radio it's a very useful tool of information. And so let me go on to the next slide. And these are some of the actual practical things that we've been doing, right? So we create, you know, whenever we have a call to action, right, we create our materials in both Spanish and English. And I highlight Spanish and English because that's predominantly where our base, you know, the language that our base speaks. But in our area, through our census work, we're finding out that a lot of the languages that sometimes, you know, sort of just get dismissed are very predominant in our region too, and especially in the Asian American community, right? And just multilingual households. And sometimes I do think that a lot of the times it gets sort of focused on the Spanish language because, you know, obviously population shows that to be the predominant second language, or, you know, to a certain extent even first language. But locally, you know, whenever doing those decision makings, you have to take into consideration the local demographics. Perhaps Spanish is not the most common, you know, language in another specific area or in a city, right? And so that I feel like, you know, that tends to get dismissed a lot, and you know, I think it's an opportunity of growth. And so another thing I want to highlight, you know, so we already had a podcast, right? And so our podcast, however, before, you know, this pandemic and the crisis, right, we were not thinking on doing it in Spanish at all, right? And now, you know, we had to reshift that. Why? Because we know that, you know, our communities, and I've seen this because you know, our family members, right, and our different community members, they're on YouTube all day long. You know, they're watching, you know, their church services on YouTube, on all these other live streams, and so we can continue to do that, you know, from another perspective, continue to provide them the resources and opportunities of learning and participation by simply just understanding what is it that they currently use and not trying to impose so much, you know, different learning curves, sometimes very, very high learning curves that they might have with other platforms. And you know, similarly through our COVID emergency relief fund, right, we've been able to also ask community members in terms of the digital divide, right? What is it that they needed? Did they need a computer in their house? Did they not have internet? Connect them with low or, you know, no cost internet services. If they have children in their house, right? Many school districts were providing hotspots or laptops, right? And it was a matter of they're not aware about this information. It's not, for us, it's easy to go on Google and type, you know, computer services or whatever the case might be. But, you know, when you're not as tech savvy, when you're not as familiar with, you know, finding those resources, then, you know, it doesn't even become an option. And so we as a nonprofit serve to those community members and all community members to be able to bridge that gap between the resources that exist and the lack of dissemination that a lot of times, you know, doesn't go told. And just to kind of share, you know, some of our work during this pandemic, right? Although these two scenarios were not necessarily online engagement opportunities, it was with social distancing. So I think as we start thinking about how we go back into a more social interactions in a very, very cautious way with our health, we can also think about ways that, you know, we can do this by engaging, in person and giving the opportunity for community members to feel that they are partaking in this new era of growth and learning. And last but not least, this is actually the picture to the left, right, is a picture of our community members on our Zoom call and us kind of, talking about, on our community meeting, highlighting some of our local issues around environmental justice. And we also had a party night. So I want to highlight this in particular because when we're talking about cultural understanding and sort of like that meeting community where they are at, a lot of our community members are, feeling there's a lot of emotional distress during this time. And for us, we were able to get a DJ. We had a party night. It was a fundraiser for our COVID relief fund, but it was also a time for us to just relax. And I love that, Julia touched on, not adding more stress, right? It was a time for us to relax, listen to music, have a DJ, have a couple of guest speakers speaking about various social justice issues. And that really provided us the opportunity. We had so many members and just even random people that were on our Facebook Live commenting how great they felt of just being in sync with community, just being having a good time, having fun and dancing, and in their homes, dancing the night away. And so that ends my portion, and I'm happy to answer questions as we continue through the panel.
Great. You want to stop sharing your screen? That way we'll be able to look at both of you. Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much. And I can't tell you how much I love your photos. All the photos are just fantastic. And I wish I would have come to that dance party. We're about to move into some Q&A, and we have a really nice amount of time. Before we do that, I want to mention that for those who are tuning in through the Cal EPA webcast, we have an email account set up so that you can ask questions, that you can be included right now in this real-time Q&A. And our email address is engagewithus2020@gmail.com. I'm going to say that one more time. engagewithus2020@gmail.com. And we've got folks who right now are monitoring that email, and then they can elevate your questions. So the first thing I'm going to do is Elizabeth and Tish, is there anything you'd like to elevate from the chat?
Hi there, yes, please. This is from Laurel, and this is a question for Julia. From your experience, is there a general preference for Zoom over other platforms in terms of usability? Are there different benefits and challenges with each system, or would it be helpful if the state of California or even specific agencies chose one platform to use for continuity? Personally, I find it challenging when each platform has a different interface.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I'll say, like, we have been primarily for our community engagement purposes using Zoom because that's what we have. So we have also, like I think Italia said, we've upgraded our Zoom account so that only limited like time, but we also have the capacity to do the simultaneous interpretation, which we've been just learning even how to do that ourselves. So we've been mostly experimenting with Zoom. I think when there's already a learning, I think, we just talked about a learning curve, like when you're trying to figure out these different online tools for the community work with, and probably for most people in California, it's easier to just have, I think, for me, I personally don't like having a million apps on my phone, and I don't like having to, go between things. I'm like, wait, GoToMeeting, WebEx, wait, which one is the one that, you have to kind of recalibrate. So I think when that's difficult for us, it's going to be difficult for anybody. So I like to just try to stick with one and get people really with it, but we're so in experimenting with this that honestly we haven't a bunch of other ones. I think from my perspective as an advocate, I feel similarly that, you know, when I'm on state or even local meetings, it's you know, it's having those instructions or having how things are going to work ahead of time is one of the ways to just make it at least somewhat easier. But when it comes to engaging a wider audience, if you're trying to do two-way, having something where you can have a phone option so people without internet can still be on is really, really important. It's just presentation. I think things like YouTube, Facebook Live, like those are going to be more accessible, but if it's engagement, having those two-way communication options is critical.
Great.
Thank you.
Other questions? I'm sorry, Natalia, did you want to add in?
No, I think that was perfectly addressed. Thank you, Julia. I think I'm not sure that I would say that we could just choose one, right? Because there's just I feel like at this point everyone's already in too many different things, and no one's just going to all of a sudden transition just to one. But I do think that the more consistent we are, even across like the nonprofit sectors and government, right, the better. And so I think if, for example, us as an organization, we're deciding to use Zoom as our platform, then just stick to Zoom, just master that and just, you know, bridge those gaps, right? But I think changing back and forth or testing at this point, I don't know that we're in a stage to be testing too much, you know, just because then, you know, that creates a lot of even larger divides. And so, and not to say that, right, we are on Zoom, right? But not to say that Zoom has it all and is a perfect platform. It has a lot of room for growth, but if we're able to sort of, you know, stick to that and or anything else that might, you know, arise, that's very user friendly. You know, I see that being, you know, I saw someone commenting on the chat, you know, that there's, you know, the trainings that folks are doing with the youth to the, you know, elderly communities and then within their organization, right? So I think continue to uplift those trainings and those opportunities because it's not that older folks or, you know, might not be interested. It's just, I can only understand how frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating for me many times. And you know, I'm a relatively young person, and so I can only imagine what it would be like, you know, if you're older and you've never been exposed to this type of technology before.
Okay. Veronica, Noemi, Marta, Elizabeth, anyone want to lift up another question?
We have a few folks asking, Julia, if you are able to share your Zoom 101 information that you mentioned. And our most upvoted question is from earlier, but would be helpful if you could speak on what community engagement strategies you think we can use to empower community members rather than simply informing or consulting with the community.
Julia, that was a little garbled for me. Did you hear the question?
I think so. Maybe you could just repeat.
Can you hear me well now?
Yeah, try again.
Okay. Several folks are asking, Julia, if you're able to share your Zoom 101 information that was mentioned. And secondly, the most upvoted question is about what community engagement strategies you think can be used to empower community members rather than simply informing or consulting with them.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we know informing and consulting is not enough in many of these situations. So first of all, on the infographic, yeah, I'm happy to share that. I think I can make sure that and then in terms of strategies, I think, you know, I ran through some, but I think in terms of making sure people have not, you know, it's not just, okay, tune in and listen to us talk about this thing, but actually, making connections with, first of all, the groups that are working on the ground with communities, finding out, when certain issues or certain types of meetings need to be elevated over others. I think especially now when there's priority shifting, when there's budgets being decided, when there's concern both at the local and the state level about how we're going to move forward from this moment where our economy is crashing, so many aspects of our society, the fractures of our society are coming to the forefront. Making space for people to actually have a conversation. I think even just that, making enough room for that, even though all of us are sort of tight on energy, tight on capacity, actively for those conversations, doing the kind of outreach that's going to lead to the kind of engagement that will allow people to really speak and be heard. So I talked earlier about instances in which we've experienced over the past couple months of residents who are, and these are residents who are willing to engage, who want to engage, who already not feeling like they're being heard, who are being shut down. So I think step one is just really basically not shutting people down, making that room and letting it come to the fore, and then also making it more of a dialogue. I think one of the things I kind of try to bring up more and more is how sterile and uncomfortable and intimidating a lot of the spaces are that we create, we think of as community engagement, and particularly when it comes to it attempts to engage with community residents. How do you make those spaces more comfortable? How do you, even on Zoom, a lot of us are, we're able to be in our own homes if we're lucky enough to do that. We're able to, it's already kind of making this interaction more personal than it would be. So how do we sort of see the human in each of us and make more of a conversation that can bring out strategies and creative solutions that are born from and built in communities that the state and the local governments are meant to support, right? So I'd say pull back the veil a little bit, make things more accessible, create more opportunities for two-way communication, for people to provide their feedback and make sure that you're showing how that's being addressed, even when we're all sort of stretched extremely thin right now.
Talia, I'd love to hear your thoughts also on this, and just again in the spirit of kind of over communicating, since we're all learning today. A lot of people might be familiar with the International Association of Public Participation's spectrum of engagement, where on the left side would be inform and on the right side would be joint decision making. And if you aren't familiar with that, you should make sure to come to our 12:30 lunch and learn, where IAP2 will be one of our kind of 3-minute presenters. But Italia, I'm definitely interested in your advice on supporting this idea of truly being engaging versus the one-way informing.
Sure, yeah, and thank you, Julia, for sharing. I think part of that, there's definitely a happy medium, and it really depends on the community you're dealing with, right? I think a lot of the times, we think of community or grassroots or just residents in just very broad spectrum and one-size-fits-all kind of perspective, and that's not the case, right? So for the most part, I think it's the main key thing would be having that assessment, right? So similar to, many agencies and organizations do needs assessments, right? And so it's in a similar way where you have to assess what is it that, what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish? Is it right now an immediate way to reach community and to make sure that they are participating and that they are being heard and that, there's proper procedures from governments and from other agencies set in place, right? Or is it this longer term strategy to continue the engagement in the community, which for us, that is the case, right? Both immediately, you know, how do we kind of make sure everybody's on board and no one is feeling left out of in this digital era, but also long term, right? I saw someone ask, you know, if we foresee us having still these virtual sort of spaces and events and activities even after the stay-at-home order is lifted. And I think for us and many organizations and other agencies, I think it's going to be a combination of both, right? So then if we're planning sort of long-term for this type of engagement and ongoing and accessibility and accountability, then we have to look at what is the needs that are out there, right? We can serve as spokespeople to kind of, you know, share information, but at the end of the day, the information could, you know, not necessarily be reflecting the information that we're sharing or that we're providing, not necessarily be reflective of the needs that are there. And so I think that's something critical to address, right? I think a lot of the times, you know, we work with universities, for example, we work with UCR, right, to kind of have this general assessment of the region in terms of both economically, right, job opportunities. And it's very unfortunate that, you know, even with this data that we provide and this assessments and research, you know, we still don't have many either, you know, for-profit, you know, corporations in our region or even, you know, some agencies that are not on board with what the research provide, right? So if we're saying that, you know, in our region, you know, especially now, right, in terms of access to jobs and all that, you know, how are we assessing the needs, right? And if we have actual data that tells us what those needs are, why, you know, we need to be then intentional about how we close those gaps. So that kind of would be, you know, sort of my takeaway from that and my thoughts on that.
Great. Next question. I'm especially interested if anybody from our webcast has sent in a question through our Gmail account. I just got an update. We have over 200 people watching through the webcast in both English and Spanish. And the webcast does have closed captions in both English and in Spanish. And that email, if you don't have it, is engagewithus2020@gmail.com.
Hi, Sarah, this is Lily. There are no chat emails coming in regarding the discussion. It's more about getting materials.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. Well, Italia and Julia, anything else that's coming to mind that you two would like to share? We always could take a break and everyone can go get a drink before our 10:30 session. You two want to unmute for a sec? There you go.
Yeah, no, I don't anything I want to add. Yeah, I think this is really an opportunity for us to think about it differently, every one of us, in terms of the way that we go through our day-to-day work life and do engagement work, and how that can be sort of a long-term goal, and bringing a lot more of that sort of interpersonal, honest relationship to that work. So thank you for building this space.
So speaking of that, this is something I'd love to hear your two opinions of. So two things come to mind from what you just said. One, I'm wondering if each of you would like to speak about the power of a phone call. Because sometimes when I work with folks and they'll say, no one's getting back to me. And I'll say, okay, well, did you call them? No, I emailed them and they didn't write back. And I said, well, you need to pick up the phone and call and introduce yourself and build that personal relationship. So that's one thing. And then the second, for me, it has to do with this idea of vulnerability or transparency, what you're talking about, that not everyone's perfect. A lot of our processes aren't perfect, but I think the more people are honest about the shortcomings of what they're doing, I think it makes I'm hoping sometimes it dispels some of the fear about what potentially is being hidden within a process. I don't know if you have either. I'd love to hear both your thoughts on that. Natalia, you want to go first since Julia spoke last?
Sure. You know, in terms of that, I find it really interesting because when you say this to the younger folks, they might look at you like, what? Who? No, that doesn't happen anymore. Nobody calls each other, right? But I can tell you from our work on the ground, right? Ever since, you know, the pandemic and stay-at-home order was put in place, we immediately shifted to making sure that we were checking in with community, and this was through phone calls. So aside from our newsletters, aside from our website and online engagement, we have our great team of organizers that are on a weekly basis making phone calls to community residents, in addition to the calls that we're doing on the census. And I think it's interesting because the calls that we're doing around the census are to random people. And surprisingly enough, I think in a way, random people still do pick up their phones from random numbers. And those conversations have been about building those relationships, not just about the census. For us, it's gone beyond, right? Making sure that, hey, how are you doing during this pandemic? Is there any resource that we can provide to you? Do you need, you know, testing services? You know, do you need to know where, food services, and many other resources, right? And so I think it's very important to not forget that, yes, people could still answer their phones, and that, you know, when we are calling, even if it's someone that we might not know or have an established relationship with, if we're genuine and if we're doing it from a space of love and support, that people are very, very responsive to it. You will have obviously some people that are not interesting, or they think that you're spamming them or you know, something, right? And you have to be, you know, take cautions on those situations. But nonetheless, you know, we try to really put the information out there. And also, and this touches on a question also that was asked about the how do we kind of put ethical public engagement, right? This goes along with even the calling, right? If you don't have an understanding, a cultural understanding and background of the communities that you are reaching, then the job is just going to be much, much harder, and to a certain extent, not as successful. And so I think even when developing websites, when developing tools, right, and messaging, there needs to be a very intentional effort from across the sectors, right, the private, public, and nonprofit sector, to have cultural, not just cultural understanding and cultural language and ethical, ethnic backgrounds, but have the team that's developing these strategies or these conversations, these messages, these public announcements, with a clear understanding, right? And so I think that touches on, you know, thinking forward, how do we diversify the workforce, right, within government and public and private and nonprofit agencies, right? Because both on a, you know, the younger folks might have these new set of skills that they bring, right, and across the board without any, you know, across the, you know, in any age, but nonetheless, that cultural understanding is huge, especially as we are not having this much of interface, face-to-face conversations. It's now, you know, a text message, right, and now it could be an image or a graphic. That sometimes, you know, I've seen things where I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not appropriate, right? And I'll just, you know, close off with one brief example. You know, Riverside County had a lock. We were on curfew, and we had a curfew established yesterday. And I got a bunch of calls and emails and texts, all in English only, about the curfew. And then I got a voicemail from the city of Riverside, and the translation was an automated translation to Spanish, and I did not understand one single word of what they were trying to say, right? And of course, I'm bilingual in Spanish and English, but it was just infuriating because then I had, you know, my mom was calling me, like, I got a message, what does it mean? Like, you know, what's going on? And other people out there, I can only imagine the fright, how frightening. I was frightened when I got that sort of emergency alert, right? And not understanding what's going on, not understanding what it means. I can only imagine the added stress that it caused, right? And then there was no more follow-up on whether the curfew was lifted. So people still thought that we were on curfew as of yesterday because there was no consistency. And once again, beyond Spanish and English, right? I never saw anything go out remotely in any other language. And so that, especially in these critical times, right? You can't just go to City Hall and ask your questions, and that's already not a thing that's accessible to communities of color to begin with. And so just moving forward, those are things that we need to be very cognizant and intentional on modifying and adjusting.
Thank you. So we're almost at the bottom of the hour, and Julie, if you want to add in, I don't want to keep you from doing that, but I do want to do a poll to get a sense of how helpful this session was to folks. I'm opening that now. You should be able to see it. And then once you click through the poll with your response, can you please open your chat function? And I would love it if I would like everyone to participate, but at least most people to participate. Can you please share one thing that was specific thing that was beneficial to you, useful to you, helpful to you about this panel? And while folks are finishing the poll and putting their thought into the chat, Julia, I'm going to ask you for a closing goodbye, and then the same to you, Italia, and then we're going to get ready for our next session. You want to unmute yourself, Julia? There you go.
Yeah, no, just thank you for the time to talk this through. I think it's really important to be thinking about how we engage in this new era, and just integrating everything that Italia said around access and culturally relevant ways of doing outreach and engagement, and especially emergency in emergency situations. This stuff is life and death. It's not just sort of your daily routine. So I think keeping in mind and moving forward with some degree of belief that we can actually make some meaningful change in the way that engagement happens in government. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Italia, one last goodbye before we.
Sure, yeah, just thank you for hosting this, and thank you for inviting us. It was a pleasure, and I'm happy. I believe hopefully my info, goes out to folks. I'm happy to connect with anyone beyond this, and continue to uplift the ways to engage our community. And so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're back. Hi everyone. I needed to grab a drink. So I'm so excited to see you, Sherry and Grant.
Hello.
So for those of you who might just be joining us right now, welcome to day 2 of our online environmental engagement project. And our session that we have right now is opportunity to engage all and bridge divides, with 2 people I adore, Sherry Davis, the Executive Director of the Participatory Budgeting Project, and Grant Lum, who is the Provost of Menlo University, who is the Steering Committee Chair of something I'm a part of, the Divided Communities Project. And before I turn things over to them, I do want to reiterate that we have Spanish interpretation going. I'm going to stop share for a second. Hey, Grant. We have Spanish interpretation happening real time. And one of the things that I'm going to do throughout this, even though that we're digital, so we're high tech, I have these very low tech signs that if you're going too fast, I'm going to hold up. Okay. If we're running out of time, I'm going to be very high tech here. Because anybody who knows me from regular in-person meetings knows that I love to chart and use markers. So now that I'm at home and I can't use markers, this is all I can do. All right. So for those of you who are watching through the webcast, We highly encourage you to use our email, engagewithus2020, to send any questions or comments so that you can participate in the session. And just like before, as Brandon and Sherry talk with us, please use the chat function for any thoughts or comments. And as questions come up for you, put them into the Q&A so everyone can see them. All right, so Sherry, you ready for me to hand things over?
Yes.
All right, go for it.
Well, hello, everybody. And Sarah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Sherry Davis, and our session is about opportunities to engage all and bridge divides. And if you've been listening in for the last almost day and a half now, you've had an opportunity to get grounded in what that looks like. Our last session, we talked about some strategies for engagement. And Grant and I are going to talk about some strategies that we've used, that we've seen work really well in engaging all people from all backgrounds, in particular, those that experience the most barriers, successes that we've seen in doing that, and then key takeaways and reflections. Grand and I hope to make some space for you all to bring questions forward about our work, but also just thoughts or ideas that you all have. And so before I go on any further, I just wanted to make a little bit of space for Grand to introduce himself a bit more and share a little bit about his work. And then I'll introduce myself a bit deeper and share a bit more about participatory budgeting. Grand, does that sound okay to you?
That sounds perfect, Sherry. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to a good conversation with Sherry and with everyone who's attended. And thanks, Sarah, for being one of the organizers of this. This morning was really terrific, and I think we will follow up what was said earlier as well by Italia and Julia, the last session that you all did. I think this is incredibly appropriate to be thinking about online engagement, and certainly given what's been going on in the world over the last couple of weeks with the protests and with the tragedy of George Floyd, and how we think about the voices that are marginalized and unheard, and how do we engage them has become even, I think, more critical here. So just a little, per Sherry's question, just a little bit of background that I think I'll bring to this. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the provost at Menlo College in California. And because of that, I have been living on Zoom for the last 3 months. We have brought all our students, all our faculty, all our meetings to Zoom. So I've been thinking about this issue pretty much daily of how to bring voices, how to bring students who are now who spread out, to how to engage them, especially voices that might not be heard there. So that's, I think, one part of it. Before this, I've been working with Sarah on the Divided Community Project, which is housed at the Moritz School of Law at the Ohio State University, where the focus was on polarization due to various causes, whether hate crimes, race, poverty, whatever the issues, and how do you bring communities together? How do you prepare for situations like what's going on right now in terms of protests, in terms of and how can communities build resilience there? So I think that's a key, and we've been using Zoom even in that regard to bring folks together, and I'll talk about that. Prior to that, and I'll end here and I'll turn it back to Sherry. I was at the Department of Justice, nominated by President Obama to run the Community Relations Service, which was created by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and which focused on conflict resolution, initially on race issues, and initially focused on issues like desegregation. And when I was there, we dealt with the issues of Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and we would be out there on the front lines talking to Black Lives Matter, talking to the police department, and trying to figure out ways of allowing for peaceful assembly, for First Amendment rights, but also maintaining safety. So and how we think about that today in through online engagement, I think is a critical question. So I'll stop there, Sherry, and turn it back to you.
Grant, thank you. So, Sarah, I see that you have your hand up. You're also on mute. So you might want to take yourself off mute. There you go.
Grand, in case folks haven't heard of the Community Relations Service, because I do think it's so important. I mean, it's unfortunate what's happening right now, but could you just explain one or two more sentences about this idea of the nation's mediators and actually the way that people would be deployed to a location? Because I know our listeners would be interested.
Yeah. So it was an agency that, per the 1964 Civil Rights Act, is meant to help support communities on a voluntary basis to deal with conflict, to help resolve disputes. It really was the focus on how do you help communities engage and empower rather than a top-down approach to do so. So we had mediators, conciliators, and facilitators, people who use skills like the ones that you and many of your colleagues and many folks here have to work with communities that were experiencing strife. So whether that meant creating a town hall for folks, for people, for residents to have a voice in what was going on, it was often in training protesters to do so in a peaceful way, because there are, as we know, people whose goal in these situations are not to be peaceful, and how to maintain safety and maintain peace for those who want to peacefully protest as well. It's often rumor control. It's dealing with the fact that when these things happen, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and we're trying to prevent that. And it is working on trying to solve problems, to also resolve disputes between law enforcement, protesters, etc. I could go on, but I think that will help folks understand CRS a little bit better.
Grant, thank you for adding that in. I feel so lucky to be in conversation with someone who has been so thoughtful and intentional for so long about this work that is so incredibly impactful in communities. And it kind of brings up this idea for me that I've been thinking about a lot. And that idea is kind of around radical imagination. And as we talk about what it looks like to do deep engagement right now, I'm finding that requires us all to radically imagine. And a lot of my work at the Participatory Budgeting Project has been about bringing folks into a space where they can radically imagine things differently, where they can imagine a world outside of what their experience has been. And I think that's how we craft like new experience, new shared experience for folks in community. And so I'm going to tell folks a little bit about my work and what I do with the Participatory Budgeting Project. But before I do that, I wanted to invite folks to answer a question for me. And you'll answer this question in the chat, and you'll put in a number. You put in a number between 1 and 5. And the question is going to be, how much do you already know about participatory budgeting? If you could teach a webinar on PB, you're going to put in a 5. You're like, I know a ton about this already. If you're like, I've never really heard about it before, you're going to be on the 1. You're going to put up a 1. If you're somewhere in between, like you kind of know about it, but you might not be able to explain it to another person, maybe you'll be like a 3. So if you really already know about PB, you're going to put a 5 into the chat box. If you've never really heard about it before, but you want to learn a little bit, you're going to put a 1. And if you're somewhere in between, pick a number between 1 and 5 and put that in the chat box. I'm seeing numbers roll in. I'm seeing 1s and 2s and 3s. So some people have heard about PB before. There might not be a ton of participatory budgeting experts here. I even see a 0. There's some people that are a 4. That's great. And so my hope at the end of this conversation is that everybody is at least a 4. You know what PB is, you could tell another person what it is, and you still want to learn a little bit more about it. That's my goal for today. Sarah, I'm going to invite you to put up one slide for me. You are reading my mind. That's the one I wanted. So this image describes the PB process, and you'll see that it's a bit of a cycle. And so I'm going to tell you how participatory budgeting works. Participatory budgeting is a democratic process that allows community members to directly decide how a public budget works. And when I talk about a public budget, I am talking about tax dollars. And so when we look at a public budget, we have the opportunity to think about where we can make some decisions together. And PB works because it gives a process so that we can make some decisions together about public dollars. The first part of this is to design the process. So where is the budget going to come from? What is the goal of the process? Is it to do some divest, invest work, right? Divest from harmful things that are happening in community, like over-policing, and investing into public safety alternatives. That's an example of how PB can be used. It can also be used to think about, this capital budget is really large, so where can we make some decisions together about what people need in community? Once we design the process and determine what the goals of the process are, we collect ideas, hundreds, if not thousands of ideas. This is the radical imagination part. How would you use this pot of funds to make your community better, to make it safer, to make it more livable? And once we collect all of those ideas, we move into this next phase of proposal development. Now, this is where community and government sit on the same side of the table and they workshop these proposals. What's needed, what's feasible, and what's going to have an impact? And how do we center equity in this conversation? After that happens, we see some projects like fully formulated, priced out. There's a price tag that goes on them. They're fully vetted so that we can make a final ballot. Nothing makes it onto the final ballot unless it's really going to happen if community votes on it. This is what accountability and transparency look like. When that ballot goes out into community, unlike a traditional local or national election, it usually is out there for a week, sometimes two, and community members have an opportunity to vote. Now, when we do PB in Oakland, there's no minimum age group, right? So anyone of any age that can interact with the materials can vote. When we do this in Boston, folks that are 12 and up have an opportunity to vote in the process. Generally speaking, PB reduces barriers so that folks have an opportunity to engage regardless of citizenship status. And there are differences in terms of age. We've seen incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folks really be overrepresented in PB processes because we remove those barriers. And then last but not least, the projects with the most votes are funded in community. And then the cycle begins again. So the best part about PB is when an agency, a school, a city, a community adopts PB, it marks a change in the way that they do business. They have real infrastructure to work with community, deeply engage community, and have a full participation model around community decision-making. So that's what participatory budgeting is. This chance for community and government to come together, sit on the same side of the table, radically imagine, develop concrete proposals, and really make them happen in community. So this is the work that I do now across the country to start PB processes, to empower folks. But my real thinking here is that this is a way to teach folks how to navigate government so that we can really change systems. And Sarah, I want to go ahead and close this screen so I can see Grant's face again. I wonder, Grant, I'm talking a lot about systems change, what participatory budgeting is, how it works, and there's a lot of hope in this model. And I think I'm seeing a lot of big wins with PB even in this moment. But one thing that we have to face right now is that our old engagement strategies from before COVID have to be adjusted. When we think about what the world is going to look like in 1 week, 1 month, several months from now, it's a bit different than what it was before.
Sure.
And I wonder what you're thinking about, because I'm thinking about how I'm going to engage folks deeply in PB. But I'm wondering what you're thinking about. Are you starting over, or are you using what you've learned before to kind of inform this moment when it comes to deep and successful engagement?
Thanks, Sherry. I think I would have put myself as a 2 on participatory budgeting. So I'm already up to a 3, I believe, here. So yeah. I think you did a terrific job on that. And you know what I really appreciate about participatory budgeting and any sort of consensus building, activity or any sort of activity that you're trying to get at, the challenge is what you are focusing on, which is, do we have a representative group? Have we reduced the barriers for folks who have been formerly incarcerated to be there? And I think that's always been the question in the type of work that I did at the Department of Justice. When you're going into a community, have we identified the people who should even be at the table? It's such a hard question to which faith leaders should be at the table, which activist groups should be on the table. There are there's politics involved in these sort of situations. So can everybody see, I have share screen and I put something that says DCP hosts Second Academy.
Yep, we see it.
You see it? Good. So, and Sarah's familiar with this, and I know Terry Amsler, who's in the house, was engaged in this as well. So, we've been funded, I do want to acknowledge, by JAMS, the JAMS Foundation, and this work was working in conjunction with the ABA, the American Bar Association section of dispute resolution, and we've also worked with the American Arbitration Association in the past. But we brought together leadership groups from Bloomington, Indiana, Charlotte, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Indiana, and another Midwestern city as well, to think about and to prepare for how to deal when there are divisive events in your community. And the first one, as you can tell, this is pre-COVID-19. They were actually together in Chicago. March was a little bit cold still for folks there. But since that time, and this is where I think, to Sherry's question, the benefit, the promise that I think also Julia and Natalia talked about, there are potential benefits of bringing people who might not otherwise be together. For people, Sarah, the question you asked, people can have a conversation that might not be able to have a conversation before. We did a Zoom session a few weeks ago where we brought these folks back together again. And yeah, they're talking about issues of police brutality, and they're having conversations with each other. And so faith leaders can talk to each other, civil rights leaders can talk to each other. And that creates a kind of conversation that we would not have had in the past, as well as we did, so that they can get more expertise from each other, talk to people in the same position in different cities in a way. And again, some of them had relationships because they met with each other, honestly, face to face first. But there, and that's where breakout rooms comes into play, right? It's not just when we talk about consult and inform and converse and dialogue and decision making, all those different parts of what it means to come to agreement. We can use the new platforms to create conversations that did not happen or could not have easily happened before, I should say. And given the limitations that we have, to then allow folks to get new ideas, to just get support in ways that we found really helpful to people. So Sherry, let me turn it back to you to how you think about those sort of questions, as well as and what you've seen through technologies and how in the work that you've done.
Well, Gran, one of the things that you're bringing up for me in particular is that the idea of broken and fractured democracy isn't new. So while there is a lot of new and different things that are happening right now, and our reality is slightly different than it has been before, this idea that we have to fix, repair, dismantle what we call democracy right now isn't new. I would love to be in a place where I don't have to say things like participatory democracy. Mm-hmm. And I could just say democracy, and it was inherently participatory. It reflected that shared experience that we're hoping to achieve. And so I really wanted to ground in that idea, because I think it's important that we don't start over from zero. I think that there are a lot of folks that have been doing work in community, like you and others and those that you've partnered with, and that we can build on in this moment. And I think one of my biggest fears around deep engagement right now is that we are going to turn away from folks that have been on the ground doing the work, that have made major headway in managing community response and managing really empowering community to share their voice. And what I've seen right now is community members really banding together. And I think that that is like a major opportunity. And over the last 3 months, I think that folks have rightfully been going through what I would describe as like stages of grief when it comes to what their normal was. And I think it's our role right now in this space when we're doing deep engagement to really bring some folks through some stages of opportunity. And I don't say that to trivialize anything that's happening, but I do think that there are some real moments for organizing strategy, both in person and digital. And I think one of my biggest reflections about what has to happen right now in terms of deep engagement is that there's an opportunity to use digital tools. Most folks were already using digital tools in some way, but I don't think it's going to be 100% digital. And we have to go back to people and ask them what they need, how they want it designed. I think we have to continue to use these design principles that put community at the center of the design, period. So when I do this work, and I worked in government for 15 years before I came to the nonprofit sector, but when I do this work with communities, with governments across the country, one of the first questions that they ask me is, when should we bring community in to planning? And I'm like, well, if you're asking, you've probably waited a little bit too long, but that's okay, because we can bring folks in kind of right away. And I think that that is the exact same design principle that we have to use right now. I think that while things feel maybe a little bit scattered and really hard, we have to continue to keep communication channels open with community, and we have to continuously allow them to design. And the first question is, how can you participate? And we may have some assumptions about text messaging and phones and different things, but we have to let community articulate that. And community is different everywhere. It's not like there's one solution that's the same for all community members. Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask you another question, Grand, and then I want to, with an eye on time, I want to just remind folks that are listening that they can bring forward some questions that they want to ask us that we can pull into the conversation. So if you have a burning question, now's the time to drop it into the chat, to send it via email. But my next question for you, Grand, is really actually about trust. I think we've talked about some major divides. We've talked about some opportunities for deep engagement, but I want to talk about trust. There's a real fracture in terms of trust in government right now. Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts and reflections on how we repair that? Like, just easy question, softball for you.
Absolutely, I appreciate it, Cher. One thing you made me think about, and it relates to trust. So I'll start there, because you worked, a lot with young people and their engagement, right? And you talked about chat boxes and all of that. So it's interesting of how a word that gets to me before trust is feeling safe, even, right? How do I get to trust if I don't even feel safe to how we engage? This could be intimidating. If you've never used Zoom, like, we've all had the experience of someone just not, and there's all these issues. And by the way, there are a lot of new issues, legal issues and issues of it being more easily recorded now. And we are recording here, but times when you don't want it recorded or that there's all that. One thing I found fascinating in working with our students, and at Menlo, about 35% of our students are first gen, 50% are students of color, and 95% on some sort of financial aid. So what was interesting to see when we went online was, in some ways, it was easier for students to participate via Zoom than it was in the classroom. They were in their homes. They felt a little bit safer. There were ways of participating via chat and brainstorming ideas, putting them into little breakout rooms. So there's something that was surprising. And that again, something that, how do you create trust is creating safety for people first. And I think that's going to be important, and it can be hard. I'm not saying that means it's going to be easy on these new platforms, because it can be harder too. The other point I would put into that is and it came up in the last panel, is that the old school methods still matter. You've got to maintain connection. You've got to continue to just talk to people. There's opportunities now to call people and people will pick up, right? People are at home and they're not in commutes and whatever there happens to be. So in this work, in the kind of work that I've been engaged in, you can't be seen as a trusted mediator in highly volatile situations unless these vastly different stakeholders have trust in you. I mean, so Sherry, I think you raised the absolute right question, whether it's a protester, a faith leader, a law enforcement official, but it's an important space. You all know the importance of having a good facilitator, a good mediator, because they can bring people together. So I think that role becomes even more important now, and maybe even harder to build that trust. But that's the role I think many of the people in this audience play, whether you're in a governmental role or a nonprofit role. Somebody has to facilitate, right? Somebody has to do these things. So you're doing, I see you want to jump in there, Sherry, and I think it's good. I want to have a conversation, but I think that's an important part of this trust question as well.
Yeah, I'm just nodding along and I'm just very vocal I'm like, yeah, exactly, Grand. But just to add on to that, I think this piece around trust is really interesting because you're right. I do think it's safety. But I also think that it's transparency and accountability. And I think that when you recognize, like in any relationship that's fractured, what that requires is some support and some healing. So this is where we talk about restorative justice. This is where we talk about reclaiming wealth. And this is why I think tools like participatory budgeting are so important, because it allows community members to really exercise some control over what's happening around them. Right. The opportunity to shape things, to bring resources into their space, and to customize things in ways that they're going to need, and it's culturally responsive to them, right, and to their circumstance. And I think that's a big ingredient in trust, is this opportunity to shape circumstances around you, and the idea that it's tax dollars, right? These are dollars that folks are putting into the system with the hope that it has an opportunity to improve their lives. And so this is a chance to really come through on that. You said something else that really stood out to me though about trust, and that's good facilitation. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a couple ways that can happen. We can try really hard to make folks that are in our organizations really wonderful facilitators. And we can also turn to the folks that are grassroots leaders in community and lift them up to facilitate good things. And I think that is a really important ingredient in trust as well. And so recognizing that we have about 15 minutes left, I do want to pull in some questions that are coming in either on the chat, and if folks have a question, please do that. There might be some in the Q&A, but one that I just saw is like, how do you combat this virtual fatigue? This idea that we're doing deep engagement. I don't know about you, Grand, but personally, I'm on Zoom calls for 7 to 8 hours a day. It is exhausting. Yeah. And one thing that I've started doing is just asking, like, does this need to be Zoom? And it's funny because I have started to go back to phone calls in moments where I don't need to be on camera, where it's not necessary. And I think it's important for me as an executive director to model that with my team so that they don't always feel like they have to be on camera. And the other thing that I've started doing with folks too is I work with a lot of folks in various circumstances who are sheltering in place at home, and have had to do some classes kind of on teaching people how to put up a virtual background if they're not in a space that's conducive to a meeting. And it's things that are as simple as that. So one, it's like not every meeting needs to be virtual. And two, it's like, how can we set people up for success when they have to be in a virtual space? So those are two things that I've been doing to combat some virtual fatigue. But I wonder what you've been doing to manage that.
Yeah, and I saw that question on the chat as well. I absolutely agree. Like we have students who who are living at homes where there are multiple people living there and where they can't find a private space. Virtual background is so important to having sort of that privacy and security to doing so. I think it's important in any organization to create a culture of, let's not go from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, that there has to be a sort of 3 to 3:45 or something that you start to build within your organization to give people a break. Because we used to walk to rooms, or we used to do that, but now we don't have that. Now we just go from one to the next. And by the way, there's actually research that shows in an initial conversation, this wasn't based on video conferencing, but that you actually can build better rapport, get more information if your first meeting is by phone rather than in person. Because there's so much stimuli that comes from video that you're trying to pay attention to a stranger, you're better off just focusing on voice.
Yeah.
Anyway, and plus there are all these issues of people, there are all these issues that we're talking about today about people who feel, I see it in the students, I see it in a number of people, how we appear on the screen. All of a sudden we have to think about all these issues of how we look and all of that. And so I do think let's use phone calls, especially if it's one-to-one. You know, there is a benefit to doing so, and it's also of personal sort of putting your limit. And I need to be better at that because I'm trying to figure that out on how many virtual calls we, video conferencing calls we do. But I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of practical advice that we're giving, and we'll be coming out of this as we all do this, basically.
Well, that's my second one for the day. I got Grant to commit to doing less video calls in general. So Grant's team is going to send a huge thank you to everyone in this conversation. I'm watching some other questions come in. And I see some questions about basically, how do you get PB started? Like, how do you even do something like this? How do you move in this sort of situation? And the second thing that I'm seeing a lot of is, how do you make sure that like underrepresented communities are overrepresented in these sort of decisions? So how do you make sure that folks are not just showing up and lobbying and not really hearing marginalized community members? So I'll start, Grant, and you may have some thoughts on this as well. But the big thing in terms of how do we get this started? So PB usually happens in one of two ways. Community members either say, we really want to do this, or someone with their hands on the levers of power, a city manager, a city councilor, a mayor, someone with access to a public budget says, I want to do this. I want to make these budget decisions. I want to make this budget process more equitable. Oftentimes, these two groups come together. And then what happens is PBP, my organization or another, comes in and says, this is what participatory budgeting is. Here's how it could work in this instance. What do you think? And we do some kind of co-visioning and co-crafting and co-design together. And then we step back and say, look, you all need to decide if you want to do this. Are you in? Is community in? Is government in? That it has to be an opt-in moment. This is not a top-down process. Community has to say yes. Government has to say yes. Once that happens, then it becomes really easy to build together the scaffolding for this. A lot of folks are really intimidated by this like conversation to bring PB forward. And it's like, whoa, this is going to be different. You're right. It is going to be different. It's not impossible. PB started 30 years ago in Brazil. It has spread to 7,000 communities across the globe. PB started 10 years ago in the United States. Now, there are at least 100 PB processes across the country in the United States. In California alone, I can immediately think of about 7 or 8 PB processes in California. I might be lowballing. There might be more than that I'm not thinking of in my quick estimation. But this last question that I just wanted to touch on really quick is, when we do PB, how do we make sure that like the usual suspects don't come in and co-opt the process? Part of that is in the design and the goals, because we build outreach strategies around folks that are most marginalized. And we have folks that are most marginalized actually design the process so that they're at the center every step of the way. And that's been a big piece of how we've designed PB to work and manage against some co-opting elements. The other piece is that we're talking about need, feasibility, and impact. And so that's been a real grounding force in this process as well. But Grant, I wonder if you have any thoughts on how we manage and keep deep engagement processes from being co-opted by folks that have more resources than low-income individuals.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I've come from a dispute resolution background, like perhaps a number of folks on this call as well. And it's really thinking about dispute systems design, right? It's thinking about process design, because it doesn't happen automatically. And I think that is a hard question and something we're going to have to think about as we utilize more of these video conferencing platforms. Because yeah, now somebody who doesn't live near Sacramento can come on, and we can have the concerns that the loudest voices go into it. But that's the benefit of things like polling that Sarah used earlier, because then you're using things that go at least on the group that's present. You're utilizing that approach. I remember a situation where it was a NIMBY case where a Walmart would go to. And there was concerns like, oh, we don't want it here, we don't want it there. But by using polling techniques and figuring out, they were able to graph it out and figure out there was a location that everybody in that meeting could agree to. And they might not have gotten through it unless they had been thoughtful about whatever we want to call it, the process design, the design of the consensus building approach, to not focus on the loudest voices, but to get a sense of all the stakeholders in a room in a democratic, in a participatory, in a fair method here. I think that's important to know.
Yeah, and I also think that this isn't a process, like folks may be thinking about, wow, how would government even manage all of this? Like, this would be like one person's job to coordinate a PB process or a deep engagement process. Well, there are tools to support that, but there's also this opportunity to actually, I don't know if you all have noticed this, but there's usually like 17 engagement processes happening at once. So there's an opportunity to actually streamline engagement, make it deeper, and actually make that job for the person that works in government, that used to be me, a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient. So I think that's the other big piece of this. It's making it easier on both sides and making that two-way communication a bit easier, which actually brings me to this moment of COVID. Folks have asked me, how do we use PB right now? Can PB be used right now to allocate relief funds, to talk about like stimulus dollars and how that is disseminated down into community? And the answer is yes, to a degree. I think that there is a role that PB can play in distributing funds in any circumstance. I think that the places that are best positioned to do that right now are folks that already have some deep engagement infrastructure. If you're starting from zero, I think it's kind of hard to do PB at this moment in time, but it is not impossible. It is going to require some radical effort, but also some just radical imagination. But the reason why I bring that up is because Phoenix, Arizona, their entire high school district does PB. And when I spoke to the administrators there, I was like, what are you all doing right now? Are you moving forward with your PB process? And they were like, we've actually already completed the vote. But Sherry, you should know that because we have been doing PB in our entire district, when COVID hit, we were better positioned to communicate with our school universe about what to do, what they needed, how to distribute resources to them, because they already had some muscle in making decisions on their school district budget every year. So everyone already had these deep engagement infrastructure set up. So when the crisis hit, folks were able to use that infrastructure very quickly to get resources out to folks. So I'd argue that folks that have been doing this were better positioned in this moment, and we have to continuously invest in infrastructure so that we're safer and can make big decisions together when challenging times occur. Grant, I want to turn it over to you. We're getting close to kind of last thoughts here, but there might be a question or two that you saw that you wanted to address or lift up. So I did just want to create a little bit of space for you to offer any final reflections, or if you saw a question that caught your eye, I wanted to give you a chance to address that.
First of all, thanks, Sherry. It's been terrific having a conversation with you. The one thing I would pick up from what you said, I think is true for the work that I do, and it'll go to the last words. I just shared something on the Bridge Initiative, right? The benefit of consensus building, facilitation, it comes from the same place as community conflict resolution in the 60s. It comes the same place that helped develop participatory budgeting, which is that you want to let the people decide versus having it be top down. Change happens in many ways, right? We need litigation, we need laws change, but it can't just be, but it also needs to be one where the people themselves are resolving their issues and moving forward. And that was the idea when in the work that we did at the Community Relations Service at DOJ and what we did Divide Community Project. I just want to share with folks this called the Bridge Initiative, which is basically offering rapid consultation. Right now, we know it's needed in communities throughout the country on the challenges that they're facing as they're trying to maintain safety, as they're trying to do peaceful protesting. And we are fortunate to have a former regional director from the Community Relations Service, Thomas Battles, there. I put up his telephone number because we know folks that may be easier to call. We also have an email address up there. But this is if you need some consultation on what's going on with your community right now today to deal with the challenges that may be going on because of law enforcement issues, the community issues that are going on today. And I want to make sure folks had that resource. It's another value that the Ohio State Divided Community Project is doing something very proud of that we helped create. But I want to thanks to everyone. Thanks to Sarah. Thanks to you, Sherry, and thanks to everyone who attended today.
Grant, thank you.
Before we wrap up, Sherry,
Yeah.
I do want to take a moment to double check in with Lily to see if there's a Gmail question, because some folks are watching through a webcast, so they can't use the chat or Q&A feature, and we don't want to leave them out. Lily, is there anything you would want to raise up before we wrap up today?
So this email came in a while ago. It had to do with community engagement in times of, the social distancing. So the email was, I'm going to paraphrase, was basically about concerns with having to return to the office in a culture where everyone is still required to work, being socially distanced, and there's a certain demographic within even an office culture, which seems to be more pushed or pressured to go to the office. And this participant basically said that there's a push-pull, it seems, between the leadership and mixed messaging. So how to best kind of engage or communicate that staff don't necessarily feel safe to go to work. Any comments on that?
Sarah, sorry.
I was just going to mention that we've got the deputy secretaries of the Resources Agency and Cal EPA speaking tomorrow morning. So one thing I'm thinking about is we can relay this question to them.
Yeah. And maybe just in the spirit of keeping everyone on time, I'll offer my closing 30 seconds here. But deep thanks to the participants, to Grant, to Sarah for bringing us all together in conversation. And if I could close with like 2 final thoughts, they are that young people are not future leaders. They're leaders right now. And I can't think of any major social movement that hasn't been moved by the spirit and energy of young people, period. And so in this moment, I think taking care of and allowing young people to lead is essential. The second thing, and I'll just reiterate, this idea of fractured democracy isn't new, but we have an opportunity right now to really do something different. And that can look like reshaping what normal decisions have looked like in government and bringing those new opportunities to reimagine how we make decisions forward right now. We can plant gardens of genuine democracy. Participatory budgeting is a tool that you can use. If you're still wondering how, I did put in my information into the chat, but if you check out participatorybudgeting.org or pbcan.org, those are really great ways to get in touch with us. If you want to help us grow our work, if you want to help us start PB in your community, we're really excited about doing that. And this work doesn't work without partners. So we don't come in and take over communities, we empower community leaders to lead in their communities. So thank you all for having me. I hope folks have moved up from a 1 or a 2 to maybe a 3 or a 4. I hope that you all tell folks about participatory budgeting, and I hope that you all bring it into your organizations and your communities. We're building toolkits for schools, for organizations, and for cities to do participatory budgeting right now, with hopes that we see state, regional, and national PB processes. So help us do that.
Great. Sherry, before I ask Fran to say one last closing goodbye, just like our last session, if you were with us, I would like to encourage everybody participating now to open their chat function and please share one key takeaway from this session. What was useful, inspiring, beneficial. And while folks are doing that, Fran, if you want to say one more thing, then we'll take a little break before our 11:30 session.
So I would just say thank you. It was a pleasure and a privilege to address everyone here today. There's a lot to think about in terms of the divides that exist in this country and what we can do now. This, I think, was a tremendous conversation in the broader sense of how do we bring in voices that aren't being heard? How do we help resolve issues on our own together in positive, constructive ways? And how do we deal with underlying injustice in this country? And how do we work together to make things better? So I appreciate how we think about it from an online perspective, this new world that we're in. So thanks to everybody.
For those of you who are just possibly joining us at our online environmental engagement conference, Building Our Skills Together, my name is Sarah Rubin. I am with the Department of Conservation within the California Natural Resources Agency. I'm a mediator and meeting facilitator, and I am your host for moderating today. This is a session that I have been looking forward to. It is called How to Optimize Digital Engagement. And we've got the best of the best here. We've got Matt Leitinger from Public Agenda. We have Miguel. Am I saying your last name right, Miguel? Will you tell me?
Alatorre.
Miguel Alatorre, who is from Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And we have Dave Biggs from MetroQuest. So I gotta admit, I have known two of these guys for really probably at least 10 years or something. Don't say that, sorry. And Miguel, I have really been looking forward to this, and your reputation precedes you. We're so glad you're here today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on too.
Yeah, this is really fun. So before we dive in, I'm actually gonna pull the PowerPoint deck back up because I wanna remind folks about our Spanish interpretation. So for those of you, especially if you're new, if not, forgive me for going over it again. We have simultaneous Spanish interpretation being provided throughout all 3 days of this conference. If you haven't tried it yet, I highly encourage you to hover your mouse over the bottom of, I think it's on the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a little interpretation button. And just try it out. Go, even if you're monolingual English. See what it's like to switch over and hear the Spanish interpretation. For those of you who are with us through the Spanish interpretation, we are thrilled you're here, and we are so grateful to our team at Translang. Carlos, you're amazing. I'm so impressed with you, and we are just constantly getting compliments about the service. So, before I turn things over to Matt, I want to remind folks that we have the chat function through Zoom, we have the Q&A function, and we have a special email that we've created for the conference, Engage with Us 2020. For those of you who are joining us through the Cal EPA webcast, we want to include you. We want to include your thoughts and questions. Use that email to send a question in that we will real time ask our panelists when we get to the Q&A.
Sarah? That is engagewithus2020@gmail.com.
Okay, did I say it wrong?
Just the last part.
Okay, thank you. This is why we need a team. All right, so Matt, you ready? Oh,
sure.
Look what I did. Hold on, I'm gonna try to, here you go.
So,
I'm gonna spotlight you in Zoom speak.
Okay, that's scary. But So I'm Matt Leininger. I work at Public Agenda. Public Agenda is a nonprofit organization, nonpartisan, based in New York City, founded in 1975 to work on strengthening the relationship between citizens and government at every level. We do this through both research and engagement. And my particular story, part of it has been that I'm an engagement practitioner for now going on 25 years. And I started out not as a kind of a tech or digital native. I started out working in engagement in terms of face-to-face formats. And then I kind of was an observer of the tech various forms of engagement as they were coming on, maybe 10 years into my career. And so I started writing about those as well. And so I'm somebody who kind of looks at a bunch of different kinds of tools and practices, generally not an expert in any one of them, but I've been trying to kind of categorize them for people and help people understand, you know, what the different functions, what kinds of things.
Can I get you to go a tiny bit slower for the interpreter?
Sure, sorry.
I'm so sorry, I should have reminded you.
This is a common problem with me. Part of my role has been in my career to try to categorize lots of different kinds of civic tech tools in terms of what their purposes are, what goals can you achieve by using them. And so that's partly what you see here on this chart. Purposes on the left, you know, from crowdsourcing and ideation, gathering feedback from problems and services, often using smartphones, crowdfunding or crowd resourcing, petitions, online games, online mapping and wikis, and this mapping both of the physical environment in our communities and also the online connections that people have, illustrating options and voting on them, hyperlocal community building, where people in their neighborhood are connected to one another online as well as face-to-face, deliberative discussion, and then polling. So the right-hand column, what you see are just some representative tools. There's lots and lots of tools and platforms in all these different categories. Furthermore, some of these tools and platforms do more than one thing. So it gets somewhat confusing. I mean, and Dave, I hope you don't mind the kind of pigeonholing MetroQuest in that illustrating options row. MetroQuest is about, as an organization and a set of tools is about more than that. But the idea of this chart was simply to give people examples, things to look at, not to endorse them, but to kind of say, you know, here's some illustrations of what this can look like, this particular type of tool. In my experience, you know, what you should be doing with engagement is not just looking for one tool and not just looking for one kind of format for face-to-face meetings either. What you should be doing is thinking about an approach that has a range of ways people can engage for different purposes that could appeal to different audiences. And that it's that kind of combination of things that's usually much more effective. And particularly if you've got kind of a long-term strategy in terms of the community you're working with or the issues you're working on, you really need some infrastructure, a system for engagement that includes a bunch of these tools and other things as well. And that's much better than any one of these platforms or tools. And then if we can go to the next slide, the other part of this is figuring out, you know, who's going to participate.
So my name is Miguel Alatorre, and I'm a community organizer and policy advocate for Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice. And lately, with the difficulty that everyone's been going through, we've had to kind of add some new resources to our toolkit in order to keep, you know, doing what we do in our work. So I just have like this small little presentation to go over some of the points we've been doing. So why is the digital outreach important? And so obviously, you know, with these trying times with the COVID virus, we've definitely had to switch up the way that Green Action does outreach. And a lot of us that do this type of work have had to adapt to this new technology. And one thing we found that's a definite benefit of this digital outreach is kind of saving money and expanding our toolkit. So we're saving a lot of money in like traveling, gas and resources, keeping our carbon footprint small by not traveling, especially, you know, I'm from Kettleman City, California, and Green Action is out of San Francisco. So it definitely saves the 3-hour to 6-hour commutes back and forth to San Francisco. It's a good way to connect our at-risk populations in a safe manner. It is very trying times that we're in right now. So I definitely want to try to communicate with my fellow community members here in Kettleman City and the people that we do work with Green Action in a manner that puts them at the very least amount of risk doing this. And so it also helps maintain contact between the EJ communities and advocates. So nowadays, when we do our outreach, we feel, and the community feels, that we're more connected than ever due to the fact that, anytime we need to see each other, we don't have to necessarily meet up in public anymore. We don't have to travel. We can use this online way to converge. And it definitely helps us as advocates connect the community members to educational resources and show them the different fact sheets and different presentations that we have. And it's an easier way for us to kind of put it out there to the community versus kind of just talking about it via Facebook and other social medias. So how can cyber outreach be done? So there's a plethora of ways that, outreach can be done nowadays with all the tech that's available. A lot of the things that we've been doing with obviously involve Zoom and the whiteboard features and all other basic features that come with the Zoom Pro and Zoom Business. We've been implementing those into our academies and educational forums. I don't know if some of you guys have had the pleasure to see some of our Facebook and YouTube live events that Green Action has recently put together. That's just another way that we decided that we would switch our outreach to make sure that our message is still very clear and very proud. And it's allowed community members to connect with us in ways that are unprecedented and we never really have done before. Another thing that we really use in our toolkit is the Kahoot quizzes. I don't know if everyone is familiar with Kahoot, but it's an online program designed specifically for like school teachers or people like ourselves that have needs to put out educational material. And so these Kahoot quizzes can be modified so that they're polls and people can connect to them. And it comes with interactive games and other things that are very good in our Youth Academy sessions, specifically where we work with youth ages maybe like 11 to 21. And everyone loves it. Even our adults love Kahoot. And we've also just started to integrate our Instagram and TikTok into tools of outreach and using those to also get our message across. And so some of the challenges that we face right now for our cyber outreach is definitely, as we just saw right now, technological needs in terms of computers, routers, tablets, and high-speed internet access, which is very important to this work. It's something that I actually suffer myself being from the unincorporated area of Kettleman City. There's sometimes too much use on our network and we only have 2 internet providers available to us in the area we're in. So that's definitely a very huge challenge when it comes to doing this type of outreach. And also the pricing that comes with paying for like the additional features on Zoom with the Pro account, the business account, and most definitely paying for the Kahoot, because Kahoot is a free program when you use the base features, but when you need something a little more interactive, it does cost money and it does take a monthly fee to run those, which we have to use. And so another thing that I wanted to touch on as a topic is making the Zoom format sustainable, because a lot of the questions that, our executive director had in Green Action is, how do we keep the Zoom format going even after the pandemic stops? What are we going to do to keep this format sustainable as a tool for environmental justice and really getting to know your community and their needs? And so I think Zoom is going to be used definitely by Green Action in the future for all purposes, definitely to connect ourselves with our community members much more deeply. The community itself has responded back to us on our lives and on our various social media accounts that they really appreciate the fact that we're switching to a format where they don't have to be physically present. And a lot of people have already echoed the sentiment that when you're online, outreach seems to be easier because there's definitely more participation. In terms of some of the outreach we've done recently, we recently had a cyber community forum that was canceled for Avenel that we were going to put on. But that cyber forum is being continued now that we have a little bit more resources, and the community members are really, really excited for it. It's a great way to teach them about policy, especially when it comes to the issues that we face here in the Central Valley, which is rampant pesticide use. And we all know that Kettleman's famous for a certain chemical waste dump that really does damage to our town, and a municipal waste dump that is just overwhelming the residents of Avenel. So these tools are very important for us to use in our work so that we can mobilize communities to fight the good fight and keep the pollution out of their towns and out of their homes. On the screen right now, I have some general contact info for myself and for our different social medias that we have available, including our website, greenaction.org. And this time, I know it's very difficult to keep our organizations going and to sustain the pace of work that we're doing. So any and all donations are very greatly appreciated, and you can do so on our website via greenaction.org. Anything helps, and I look forward to answering questions on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. So we've got Matt back. Perfect. There we go. Okay, Matt. So that was very helpful, Miguel. Thank you. Let's see here. Matt, I'm going to reshare where we left off. Are you on?
Sorry about that.
No, it happened to me yesterday. That's why we're a team, and that's why it's great to have multiple presenters, and that's why we talk ahead of time and prepare. And one other thing I'll say, Matt, is that one thing I said at the beginning of today's session is that this whole day of the conference is the reason that we came up with the tagline, building our skills together, is we knew we'd be working things out throughout this 3 days, and that has been true. And I mentioned that I would be sharing a little more kind of behind the curtain from a facilitation point of view than I typically would. And this, for everyone out there, it's like, this is why we prep, so that we can all seamlessly back each other up if some little thing like this happens.
So behind the curtain, what do you do when your panelist disappears?
So were you on the last one, or is this the right one?
Well, I was just going to say that the only other point, the thing about this map is it illustrates the fact that you've got to find out where people are. Just like in, if you're trying to engage them in the real world, you want to find out where they are. You want to not just try to invite them to your meeting. You want to go and figure out where they are and how they are already engaging, and how you can piggyback on that. So now we can just go to the last slide. And that's one on an approach which combines different tools. It's one that we've been doing around COVID called Text Talk Engage. And with that one, what we're using is texting, because it's the kind of the technology that the largest number of people have and that the largest number of people know how to do. So it's the least intimidating in general and most accessible to all kinds of people. And basically what the approach does is all it does is ask them to get together with whoever else they're cooped up with, or right now during staying at home, or get together with people on Zoom, as you can see from the picture. And all they need to do is text Corona to the number 89800, and they just get a set of discussion questions and polling questions that they can answer immediately using their phones, and they immediately see what other people said across the country, how they answered the same kinds of questions. So it's giving you some of that kind of interactiveness and immediate aggregation that tech is good for. One of the things tech is good for, in addition to the the intimacy, the interaction of face-to-face, in this case through the screen, face-to-face discussion. The Text Talk Engage has these discussion questions and information about COVID. It has links for people who want to volunteer, who need help themselves and want to find out where they can get help getting food, or filing for unemployment benefits, or whatever. And then there's a section at the end of it which is about policy, and it gives people a chance to weigh in on various policy questions related to the pandemic. And there's a connection there to another platform called Polis, where they can actually go much more in depth and talk with one another about kind of how they would balance the pressures of reopening the economy versus safeguarding public health. So basically what I'm saying is that if you have an approach that kind of combines tools like this, including tools that are very accessible, that may link them to things that they wouldn't otherwise use. That can be a pretty good way to do it. And there's lots of different ways to do those kinds of combinations.
Matt, I didn't hear the name of the tool you said is embedded within Text Talk and Act, Polis?
Polis, yeah, POL.is. And it has been used in Taiwan as part of a number of processes in Taiwan where they use that platform in addition, in conjunction with face-to-face workshops to get people to help make policy decisions about all kinds of things related to federal policy in Taiwan.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we've already heard from Miguel, thank you. So we next have Dave. And then just to remind folks again, after Dave's presentation, we're gonna move into a Q&A. We wanna highly encourage you to put in your questions and your chat comments now so that when we get to the Q&A piece, we will be ready. So fantastic, Dave, take it away.
Awesome. So you can see my screen now, Sarah? Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Great pleasure to be here and to join my colleagues for this topic. I'm going to speak to you today on what we have learned over about a 25-year time span, focusing on how technology can help enable better public engagement. And specifically, I'm going to focus on the results that public engagement needs to deliver in order to move the dialogue forward. My name is Dave Biggs. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at MetroQuest, and I sort of divide my time between our clients and best practices research. I do a lot of training sessions around best practices in online engagement for a variety of organizations, as you see on the screen. And we also have our ear to the ground because we have clients using MetroQuest for public engagement online across the country. And so I get first line introduction to so many different case studies. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give a very quick snapshot of some of the things that we have learned around how to deliver great results for online engagement. When we're thinking about results, we're thinking about the moment of truth. And one of the things that I think about is, for example, this gentleman who, he might be the director of planning who is presenting the results to the community or to decision makers to try to validate that the public's voice has been heard. And I just think about the scrutiny that he may get put through about the results. And typically we see 4 elements that need to be ground truth in order for public engagement results to be valid. The first one is we want to ensure that there's enough people involved. So increasing participation is a huge goal. The second is we need to validate that all elements of our community have been heard from. All demographics are represented. And thirdly, because we're dealing often with complex choices, we need to validate to decision makers that the people have understood the complexity of the questions at hand. And then lastly, if we do a good job engaging a large number of people across a broad demographic, we need to have some way of credibly summarizing the results in a quantitative way for decision makers to digest. So I'm going to touch on some of the most important elements that we've learned over the years around these 4 elements. The first one is increasing participation. It's so important to make the experience for people to participate fun and shareable. If it's fun, people will share it. And it's really important to have that validated along the way. Being multi-channel is so important. You'd never know what kind of screen people are going to try to use to access your online engagement. So with particular emphasis now on mobile, because we're finding with MetroQuest that over 50% of people will be responding to your online engagement using their phones. So it's not enough to have it possible to work on your phone. It needs to be delightful there. We have found that people will give about 5 minutes of their time. And so you really need to optimize that 5 minutes to be as useful as possible. I'm going to share with you in some of the follow-up what we have gathered around the best promotional strategies for getting the word out. And we've collected over 70 tips and tricks on the best ways to promote online engagement. So I'll share that with you in the follow-up. In the second category, broadening demographics, it's so important to use as much as you can visuals as opposed to text, because a text is really disenfranchising for a large number of people. Secondly, it's so intimidating to show up at a public meeting and have a contrary opinion. And the same is true for public forums, online forums. So it's important to give people a private way of sharing their feedback so that feedback coming in is not biased. We have found that we continually study the demographics of online participation, and we have found that even the lowest income groups have access to the internet via a smartphone. So in excess of 71% of even the lowest income groups, a total of about 91% of adults in the United States have access to the internet. So things are changing quite dramatically for the better for online engagement. But it's also important to monitor the demographics of who you're hearing from and to identify any gaps along the way. So then you can refocus your promotions on some of the more difficult to reach audiences. It's not useful to spend your promotional efforts on easy to reach people. So it's so important to monitor along the way. And social media allows us to really target people in a very effective way. And each of these, as you can see from the graphic, social networks has a bit of a different audience. So depending on who you would like to hear more from, you can use social networks to engage difficult to reach audiences. And even during COVID-19, it's important to go to where people already are. If you have a difficult to reach audience, more and more, our community leaders are working hard to engage their communities online. And so we have found great benefit in engaging directly with those community leaders to help them get the word out for your public engagement process. In terms of inform and educate, there's all kinds of ways of packing together with a 5-minute experience games that educate people about some of the choices. We've found ways within MetroQuest to create little micro learning moments, which can be so helpful to engage people in a meaningful way. And with respect to environmental questions and complex infrastructure projects, it's so important to be able to communicate trade-offs associated with different choices. And then lastly, for quantifying input, I'm going to toggle over very quickly to a case study, which kind of brings together some of the comments that I've made so far in an online example. So this is a bus study from LA Metro. And those of you who have done a lot of public engagement know that some of the most difficult to reach audiences are people who are also, interestingly, dependent on transit. And so there's a really interesting challenge with respect to public engagement for transit projects. And this particular project was able to 100% match the actual demographic categories and mix of Los Angeles by doing some pretty creative things. I'm going to spend 60 seconds going through this survey, but most people would spend, as I mentioned, about 5 minutes. The welcome screen just simply gives people a few nuggets of information about what the project is all about and encourages them to begin right away. The first question is really focused around what people's priorities are, and it gives them an opportunity to play a little game which embeds some learning in it. You're allocating resources that are available to different priority categories, and you can quickly come to the conclusion that we can't have everything. And so there's a trade-off idea built right into this exercise while collecting people's priority information. The next section of the survey actually confronts people with some trade-offs associated with bus planning. For example, would we like fewer stops so we have faster trips, or do we want more stops to shorten the walk for each of the people getting on the bus? Where would you put yourself on this spectrum? And instantly people are made aware that that the planners are dealing with some tricky trade-offs. Then we've got a map question where people can put any concerns that they would have on a map and annotate this map in any way so you can pinpoint where problem areas might be with respect to the bus network. And then lastly, we're asking people about their demographic information to understand who we're hearing from. So that took 60 seconds, but typically people would spend about 5 minutes. And I just wanted to show that it's also available in a variety of different languages, because it's so important to meet people in a way that's very comfortable to the languages that they like to use. And then when you have engaged the audience, it's so important to mine the results as carefully as you can, so you can say something intelligent about what different demographics said about their priorities. And then you can deliver in your results in a data-driven way what you've heard from the community very specifically for decision makers to get that confidence that they need. So all to support this, this gentleman or whoever it is that's going up in front of decision makers, with a focus on these 4 areas to increase the credibility of the results coming in. So that was a fairly quick run through, as you can gather, of a much longer a presentation that I have made in the past, which I can share with you in the follow-up. But I wanted to include my email address if there's any questions that you might have following the session. But now I think we can open it up for general questions from our panel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. That was so informative. Miguel and Matt, before we open it up for Q&A, I'm actually curious if you might want to comment on any of these best practices that Dave brought up.
Your microphone is muted, Matt.
You're muted, Matt. Oh, there you go. Miguel, any thoughts?
I thought it was really interesting seeing like the games put together, kind of like what we do with Kahoot, and kind of make the engagement interesting. We definitely tailor a lot of our online engagement towards youth, because we are very big on working with youth and involving them in the policy that gets shaped around the Valley. And so some of these things, when you show like really long presentations and stuff, it kind of tends to make the audience's participation drop down. It's like you said, most people, if you think about, youth specifically, nowadays we can get on our phones and at the touch of a button, we can scroll through a mass of information that we can go through in seconds. And so if you're not holding someone's attention for more than a few seconds, the outreach is not going to work. Unfortunately, it's just not going to sink in there. This day and age is, it's very easy to get information and go through it very, very quickly. And that's what a lot of people also like. They like going through their Facebook feeds and Instagram feeds and seeing videos that are 20, 30 seconds that get the point across very, very quickly. So I definitely see how on MetroQuest's end, that's very, very great what they're doing with making their engagement into a game, sort of.
Yeah, I think we do it naturally when we're talking to people, but for some reason we forget about it when we're making a presentation oftentimes. I mean, how many times have you ever stopped somebody and said, hey, I've got a story for you, and took 45 minutes to tell the story? I mean, there's no way they would stick around for that. We intuitively know that because we're sensing their level of interest and awareness. But when we're in the field, we just think that everybody's as excited about the information as we are. And the reality is there's nothing that's going to get the general public as excited as you are about the planning process.
One way I found that thinking about this that I think can be helpful is to think about engagement as being either thick or thin. And thick and thin are both good, for different reasons. You know, and SICK engagement is about small groups. You know, it's getting people together in small groups where they can really learn from each other, where they're gonna kind of deal with the fact that they may have different viewpoints, different answers to the problem, and where they're gonna come away with some shared common ground, some action steps they can take together, some recommendations they wanna make. You know, SICK engagement is good, it's hard, it's time intensive, takes a lot out of the people, you know, a lot of investment from you to set it up, a lot of investment from the participants to do it. It also has other impacts that you're not going to get from thin engagement. Thin engagement is quick, easy, fast. It's about the individual. And like you guys are saying, you want to make it fun if you can make it fun. You want to make it easy, graphically interesting. And, you know, and there's lots of things that kind of blur thick and thin, or like it's a thin thing that, you know, because it's a game, it seems, you know, you do it quickly, but then you realize you kind of get more into it, so it becomes thick, you know, so there's ways to kind of like mush these together. But I think part of it is you want to have both, because they're good for different things, and they're going to get, you know, different sets of people at different times in their lives and their day and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so that, I think that's sometimes helpful.
Thank you.
And neither, by the way, conventional engagement, like the picture you're showing at the beginning, Dave, of, you know, people meeting, you know, with a microphone, 3 minutes on a microphone, that's neither thick nor thin. It tends to drive everyone crazy. It has neither of those sets of benefits. And so part of what we're up against is the fact that the official formats for engagement, some of which we're legally compelled to use, are actually not very productive for any of us, whether we're in government or outside.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thick and thin, and I use it myself, Matt. And I don't know if I learned it from you or you learned it from me, or we just learned it at the same time. But I like to talk about an hourglass shape for engagement, where you begin by a very broad survey of community priorities, and then you go into a focus group where you say, we've learned what the priorities of the community are. Now let's roll up our sleeves as a group and try to figure out what some options are, and then take those options back out to the community online. And so it kind of takes away, I think, the little white lie that happens all the time in public engagement, which is the people who show up at a public meeting actually represent the community. They are so not representative of the community.
Right.
And so if you begin the meeting by saying, we have 5,000 people who have weighed in on priorities, and your job is to create options for meeting these priorities, it kind of takes the wind out of the sails of people to say, you know, what about my priorities? Well, we've already done priorities. Now we're talking about solutions.
Great. So let's take a moment now. I think we've had some great questions come in. This has been fantastic. Let's see, Elizabeth, Tish, anything, Noemi, Marta, anything you all want to lift up as far as questions?
Hi, Sarah. This is Elizabeth. Veronica has some questions ready for us.
Great. Hey, Veronica.
Hi. What resources or funding are available to some local government organizations that want to utilize tools that cost money or include translation services? That's one question. And then the next question, can you please explain what micro learning and what building trades off consist of?
I don't know who wants to start. I also have something I can add about the resources and tools if you guys want.
Go ahead.
So one thing that immediately comes to mind, especially if you're a small local government, is the Institute for Local Government, where I used to run the public engagement program. I'm gonna say we. They have a set of two sets of headsets that you can borrow for almost free. There's just a little shipping charge to get them to you. Now, you can't use that right now because of COVID, but that is a resource available to you. And then in my personal opinion, and I'd like the three of you to weigh in on this, I think this idea that a local government can't afford to have a budget for translation and interpretation is a myth. It needs to be something that is prioritized. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of money, but just in a way that we saw Dave do the little coins. It's like a little coin, even if it's like $1,000, something should be set into that area. Another thing folks do is they connect with community partners. I can think of a project that my colleague Crystal Love, who's presenting later, and I did in Turlock, and we paid a stipend to folks in the Assyrian community. I think it was, we spent like $100 to do a stipend for someone to translate our flyer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of money, but I think you need to be thoughtful about it. You guys want to add in?
Yeah, just in terms of like money and resources, if it's monetary resource that are the challenge and not like stuff like technology and internet access, I think the best thing to do would probably be to use like the various social medias that are at your disposal, most definitely for free. I know YouTube is a very good service to do that, which is free. And I know a lot of people have problems with Facebook in terms of their security and their practices. So a lot of people tend to gravitate towards YouTube. So that's free. In terms of like engaging to youth, youth are definitely heavy users of TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and the various other platforms. And a lot of the times, all it takes is making like a flashy looking post or a picture that holds a lot of weight to it and putting a very nice caption. And it honestly will hit very, very many eyes. If you want to look at what works, look no further than the videos that are currently trending everywhere on lives. You can look up the social media demographics on Facebook, Instagram, all through the app and see what works for you in terms of what your target audience is, what the best time is to reach them, when's the best time to do live streams. So all that's free and available if money is the challenge. That's just what I have to say about that.
Right. Great ideas. I'm sort of with you, Sarah, that I think that the lack of money for most agencies is an illusion. It's about priorities. If you look at the average amount of money that's spent on a single public meeting, with a bunch of consultants sitting at the back and 4 people that come in, the average cost of a public meeting is $10,000 to $20,000, which is about the annual subscription for most of the software that we're talking about that I showed and Matt showed for unlimited use. So it really is a question of whether or not you're allocating your resources wisely and not the lack of resources in the first place. The average attendance at a public meeting, of course, public meetings don't happen anymore, but the average attendance before COVID was 9 people. So that's a very, very costly way to engage people when you can engage 5,000 people online anytime you want. But I think that, there are public meeting resources that are not being spent right now during COVID, which are available, technically available, if the priority is there to engage people. And then after COVID, I would even recommend that agencies don't go back to planning their own public meetings. There's events that are happening throughout the community that you can bring a table and set up a station and engage people that are there for other reasons. So they haven't come purposely to engage you about your project. They're there for other reasons. And those people have opinions that are divergent from the usual suspects that show up to give you a piece of their mind.
Great. All right, we are moving towards wrapping up this session because our afternoon session has a whole different, you don't need to know, slide deck, and so we need to wrap up so we can get ready for 12:30. I have opened our poll so that we can find out how beneficial this session from 11:30 to 12:30 was for you all out there participating. And just like I did in the last session, I'm going to ask each one of you to please participate with us right now. Open your chat box, share one thing that was especially useful or informative about this session. And part of the reason we're asking that, again, my behind the curtain thing, is it's not only so we can learn from you, but so you can learn from each other, so you can see what's useful to your colleagues. And so with that, want to make a see you later, goodbye statement, everyone. Matt, you're unmuted. Want to start?
Oh, no, thanks for inviting me. This was a great conversation. Great to see everyone, and hope this stuff is helpful.
Miguel?
Yeah, I'd definitely like to say thank you for having me on here, and to everyone watching, please keep the movement going. It's very needed right now in these times that we're going in. Our work is essential, and so is everyone else's work here. Please keep it going. And if anyone needs help in terms of Zooming or social mediaing or anything like that, please feel free to contact me and I'll hook you guys up.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, thanks again. You've done a fantastic job organizing this session, and I'm missing the audience here. I want people to walk up and have a dialogue now. So if anybody has any conversations that they'd like to carry on with that they didn't get an opportunity to have their questions, we look forward to hearing from you. But thank you, especially to Sarah and all the team that has put together this conference. Congratulations on a great job.
Thank you. It would be so cool to be able to do this in person and to have 500 people who care about this be together, wouldn't it?
It would.
And I gotta do since you thanked me, you can't thank me without thanking Deldy Reyes from Cal EPA. That woman who spent so many hours into this, she is amazing, and we have an amazing team. I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again. We have 17 people volunteering their time to help with the chat and the Gmail and everything. So, and Carlos and the TransLink team. So I'm going to say goodbye. I'm gonna put up the slide that's our break, and we will come back at 12:30 for anybody who wants to be part of our Lunch and Learn. Lunch and Learn is for those of you who do not know about NCDD or IAP2 or all kinds of organizations across the country who have free resources about public engagement you can use right now.